Welcome, everyone. After billions of years, from lifeless molecules spiraling under primordial lightning to the emergence of the very first single-celled organisms, the evolutionary journey has unfolded life's countless glories. Our human ancestors continuously evolved to adapt to their changing environments and to withstand formidable foes. So could humanity truly evolve into a magnificent dragon species? Listen to this entire story of our history to find out. If you enjoy it, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to hear many more great stories. When the universe was still young, before the sun's light had touched the surface of the earth, our blue planet was nothing but a fiery red rock adrift in the infinite void. In the tumultuous atmosphere, where water vapor, methane, ammonia, and sulfur fumes swirled without end, colossal bolts of lightning struck the ground, energizing the primordial molecules. That was the dawn of an endless journey, the voyage from the very first single-celled organism to humanity today. On the primordial ocean, a vast reservoir of nutrients, countless simple molecules suddenly found the opportunity to come together. Amino acids, nucleotides, lipids, those tiny building blocks danced to the cadence of thunder, colliding, bonding, and parting again and again. In that random movement, the very first lipid vesicles, like ultra-small bubbles, formed, enclosing a private space separate from the chaos outside. Within those lipid vesicles, nucleic molecules began to learn how to replicate themselves, to reproduce and to transform. You might not expect it, but it was precisely those random reactions that opened the very first door to life. When some RNA molecule happened to both replicate itself and catalyze another reaction, it formed a self-sustaining system, the system that we later call a protocell. Those protocells had no nucleus, no clearly defined nuclear membrane, but they did have a delicate boundary made of lipids, enough to separate inside from outside, and enough to retain the information molecules and catalysts needed. Over the course of hundreds of millions of years, lipid vesicles carrying RNA proliferated throughout the oceans. These vesicles competed by absorbing nutrients and producing more copies of themselves. The versions that replicated better were more stable and survived longer, passed on that gift of superior replication to the next generation. Gradually, natural selection pressures honed these lipid vesicles. Their cell membranes became more resilient, their replication mechanisms more reliable, and their ability to harness energy more efficient. Far away, in the warm, shallow seas along the continental margins, where temperature and salinity fluctuated dramatically, an important change took place. Some lipid vesicles managed to integrate simple proteins into their membranes, opening the possibility of ion exchange and the uptake of larger organic molecules. These early cells, later called protobionts, had stepped beyond the RNA world toward the DNA-protein world. Genetic information was backed up in the more stable DNA molecule, while protein enzymes carried out most of the catalytic reactions. Early unicellular life consisted almost entirely of microscopic organisms invisible to the naked eye. They existed as bacteria and archaea, the first two lineages to branch from their common ancestor. On one side were bacteria, abundant and diverse. On the other were archaea, capable of inhabiting extreme environments like high-temperature volcanic vents or thick polar ice. Each cell carried a simple genome packaged in a single circular DNA molecule, surrounded by a flexible cell membrane, and in many cases, an additional durable cell wall. In the primordial setting, they exchanged nutrients via fermentation or anaerobic respiration. There was no oxygen, a dangerous gas for many ancient enzymes, but abundant hydrogen, methane, and sulfur. These cells broke down organic compounds, produced energy, grew, and divided. Each division was a trial. Errors in gene replication could create mutations. Most mutations were harmful, but occasionally one would arise that helped them adapt better to hot, acidic, or heavy metal-rich environments. Those resilient survivors continued to multiply, passing beneficial changes down the line. The turning point came when some bacteria learned to harness sunlight as an energy source, rudimentary photosynthesis. It began with a few simple pigments absorbing red light and converting it into chemical energy to split water and release hydrogen, then gradually evolved into oxygenic photosynthesis, as seen in cyanobacteria. The emergence of cyanobacteria transformed the entire planet. Over billions of years, these tiny blue-green cells carried out photosynthesis day after day, releasing free oxygen. Oxygen accumulated, saturated the atmosphere, and ushered in the great oxidation event. Oxygen, though precious to later life, was once a poison to the original anaerobic organisms. Many archaea and primitive bacteria were killed off, with only a few adapting to facultative anaerobiosis, using oxygen when it was present and avoiding it when it was not. However, oxygen also brought a great opportunity. It allowed aerobic respiration with far higher efficiency than anaerobic processes, releasing 2 to 3 times more energy from the same amount of organic material. The pioneering aerobic cells thrived, initiating a biological revolution and setting the stage for the emergence of eukaryotic cells. The origin of the eukaryotic cell is a story full of mystery. The endosymbiotic theory suggests that an ancient archaeal cell ate an aerobic bacterium, but did not digest it, instead retaining it to exploit its powerful respiratory capabilities. That intruder became the precursor to the mitochondrion. Similarly, the incorporation of a photosynthetic cyanobacterium gave rise to chloroplasts in plants. The result? Eukaryotic cells possess double membranes, a nucleus, mitochondria, and chloroplasts, a complex genome, and the ability to regulate life cycles far more flexibly. When the eukaryotic cells, with their energy advantage and sophisticated intracellular machinery, began to combine into primitive multicellular structures, filaments, sheets, cups, like the earliest forms of coral or green algae. Hundreds of millions of years later, they diversified into many different multicellular lineages, each adapted to its own environmental niche: sand, sea floor, shallow waters, deep waters. Throughout this chapter, we have only touched on the opening scenes of life's history, from a mixture of inanimate molecules to self-replicating single cells. Though simple, each of those cells was the very first step of the great journey, evolution. The journey from a primitive lipid vesicle to the myriad creatures on Earth, including ourselves. The wonder lies in this: there was no director orchestrating events, only the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology combining in miraculous ways. Every random mutation, every collision between molecules, every tiny catalytic reaction helped to paint the grand picture of life. And when we close our eyes and drift into peaceful slumber, let us remember that deep within each of our cells lies the memory of those very first moments when life flickered like a small flame in the primordial ocean. As Earth's atmosphere gradually became richer in oxygen, and the oceans were no longer a mere anaerobic chaos, a major turning point emerged for life. The ability to build bodies from many cells that combine, interact, and divide tasks. This was the beginning of the multicellular revolution, the first evolutionary step that carried organisms beyond the solitary limits of single cells, forming living assemblies with astonishing synergistic strength. From single cells to cell colonies in the warm seas where green algae and cyanobacteria had oxygenated the waters, the very first eukaryotic cells discovered the advantage of living together. Imagine a group of cells bound by a biological glue, mucilage, forming a thin protective film, sharing resources and chemical signals. At first, this was merely a loose attachment. A mother cell would divide, but the two daughters wouldn't fully separate, forming chains of 2, then 3 cells, and eventually flat sheets. Such structures are called choanoflagellates, found in some modern unicellular algae, and are regarded as precursors to animals because they could move, hunt phytoplankton with their beating flagella, and trap food with their collars of microvilli. Gradually, natural selection favored cooperation. Peripheral cells took on protective roles, central cells optimized nutrient exchange, and the first predatory cells learned to contract for movement and prey capture. Though rudimentary, this division of labor laid the foundation for the tissues and organs that would follow. Each cell no longer focused it solely on its own survival, but on the well-being of the entire colony, paving the way for the principle that what's good for the colony can outweigh what's good for a single cell. Emergence of primitive animals, sponges and jellyfish. Over hundreds of millions of years, those complex cell colonies evolved into the first multicellular organisms whose traces we still find today. Sponges, porifera. Sponges have no organs, no nervous tissue, but they possess a system of canals that conduct water throughout their bodies. Water carrying nutrients and oxygen enters through millions of tiny pores, passes through the choanocyte layer, then gathers and exits through a large opening. This structure is like tens of thousands of giant straws, forming a living filtration machine. Next came the jellyfish and sea anemones, Cnidaria, organisms that had learned to eject toxins for defense and predation. Their bodies consist of 2 main cell layers, the ectoderm and the endoderm, with a water-filled mesoglea matrix between them. The ectodermal cells are equipped with stinging organelles, nematocysts, ready to fire and hold prey when they touch the tentacles. Jellyfish drift with the currents, gently contracting their bodies to move. Sea anemones anchor themselves to the reef, extending their tentacles to sense and seize food. They became the first masters of active predation tactics and chemical defense. Cell signaling and communication mechanisms. For the cells within a colony to work in harmony, a communication system is needed. Evolution quickly found a solution. Signaling molecules, hormones, growth factors, move through the intercellular space, bind to receptors, and trigger internal reaction cascades. Thanks to this, when a food source approaches, the peripheral cells signal the central cells to adjust the water flow, or when a threat appears, the entire body contracts, hiding tentacles and filtering canals for defense. This sophisticated intercellular communication all began with tiny molecules. Yet it is precisely this mechanism that allows a cell colony to flexibly adapt, adjusting its shape and function according to size, environment, and survival needs. When the oceans had stabilized in chemical composition and temperature, around 541 million years ago, a grand event took place, the Cambrian explosion. In less than 20 million years, nearly every major animal group existing today, from segmented worms, Annelida, and arthropods, Arthropodida, to mollusks, Mollusca, appeared in the fossil record. These animals hardened their outer shells for protection and to aid movement. Trilobites clumsily crawled across the sea floor, boring into the seabed to hide from predators. Eurypterids, ancient sea scorpions, used their long pincers to snatch prey, and the earliest crustaceans cleverly fashioned protective helmets. All of this was the result of an evolutionary arms race. Predators needed to penetrate their prey's defenses, while the prey had to reinforce their shields, leading to an unprecedented diversity of forms, morphological and ecological diversification. Not limited to hard shells, over time organisms began to develop limbs, antennae, tentacles, carapaces, fins, and many other specialized structures. They not only lived on the seafloor, but extended into the mid-water column, and even free-swimming animals as fast as primitive sharks appeared. This diversification opened up rich ecosystems: predators, scavengers, parasites, filter feeders. Every ecological niche fueled evolutionary innovation, swiftly giving rise to millions of new species, fossils, and historical evidence, thanks to the thick layers of oceanic sediment deposited over hundreds of millions of years. Organisms with hard parts, shells, carapaces, bones, were preserved as fossils. The door through time reveals countless pieces of evidence. The Burgess Shale in Canada, the Multiancien in China, each stratum telling the story of strange creatures like Opabinia with 5 eyes on its body, Anomalocaris, the meter-long monster predator, and the spiky Hallucigenia, like a nightmare toy. Each fossil is a vivid puzzle piece, showing that evolution was not a straight line, but a tangled web with countless branching paths. We witness the journey from the first cell colonies to the Cambrian biological explosion, where multicellularity was not only the coming together of cells, but the origin of myriad animal forms and lifestyles. Let your mind relax. As you close your eyes and listen, imagine the ancient ocean undulating under dim sunlight, where the first living beings jostled for their place, staging the greatest evolutionary drama in Earth's history. When the ancient coral belts and limestone reefs increasingly expanded, the Cambrian oceans gradually transformed into a true labyrinth of life. Everywhere, from shallow seabeds to deep, gaping trenches, countless species alternately grew, preyed, and hid. In that vast expanse, evolutionary strategies continued to be refined, from the basic body plan to methods of movement, reproduction, and communication. The beginnings of the nervous system. In most Cambrian organisms, responses to stimuli remain very simple: contraction, firing of spines, or generating stronger water-filtering currents. But some species, particularly primitive crustaceans and small arthropods, took an additional step. They formed the first networks of sensory and motor cells. These cells connected via rudimentary axons, transmitting electrical signals slowly but sufficiently to teach the body to react more rapidly when danger approached. This marked the origin of the nervous system, the foundation for more complex behaviors to come. Emergence of pre-vertebrate organisms with a spine, Bacchaia, and the path to fish in the Burgess Shale deposits. A creature less than a few centimeters long was discovered, slender and laterally flattened, named Bacchaia. Although simple, Bacchaia possessed a firm band of cells running along its body, the precursor to the vertebral column. It likely glided gently through the water, bending its body to move forward, seek food, and avoid predators. The fossil evidence of Picaia confirms that, as early as the late Cambrian, organisms were already experimenting with spinal structures, paving the way for the emergence of fish, the first group of animals with a true backbone. Evolution of protective armor and fins. Primitive fish such as Hycoichthys and Miliconmingia were no larger than today's anchovies, but they possess thick skin and rudimentary scales that help protect them from predators and bacteria. The dorsal fin, pectoral fins, and ventral fins began to take shape, not only aiding balance during swimming, but also allowing sudden turns. Over millions of years, fins evolved from simple folds of skin into tougher cartilage, and finally into true bone in the species. Cooperation and competition in coral reefs. The first coral reefs. Assemblies of tube corals, plate corals, and tabulate corals caused a surge in ecological diversity on the seafloor. Corals created three-dimensional structures, providing habitats for countless small creatures, from large-legged crustaceans to tentacled seaworm. Meanwhile, predators lurking around like Anomalocaris had to compete fiercely for food, so their bodies became larger, their jaws sharper, and their vision evolved dramatically. This cat-and-mouse game drove a series of evolutionary innovations: harder shells, sharper spines, and keener senses. The emergence of algae and marine plants, not only animals, but unicellular plants and multicellular algae, also seized the opportunity to expand. Green algae and brown algae grew on the surfaces of reefs, harnessing sunlight, circulating oxygen, and serving as an important food source for the benthic ecosystem. Vast sheets of giant green algae, similar to modern algal reefs, formed expansive algal fields, helping to stabilize the ocean floor and provide food for millions of filter-feeding organisms, shaping a complex ecological cycle. With so many new species appearing, the ecological cycle gradually became complete. Decomposers, parasitic worms, sponges, and decomposing bacteria returned nutrients to the environment. Filter feeders, jellyfish, corals, mollusks, filtered out nutrients. Scavengers, crustaceans, flatworms, cleaned up the dead. Predators, fish, arthropods, kept the populations of smaller species in balance. Each of these links is a living link, closely connected to the others to maintain stability and sustainability. Fossils reveal the story of continuous evolution, thanks to sedimentary rock layers growing deeper over time. Today, we can open each time capsule to observe Cambrian organisms. Perfect fossils such as those of Anomalocaris, Opabinia, and Morella not only preserve their shapes, but also retain traces of soft tissues, sometimes with quartz pressed thin to cast shadows of internal organs. Through them, we witness step-by-step continuity, from contracting muscles and undulating fins to complex, compound eyes and defensive spines, all of which are the results of millions of evolutionary experiments. The imprint of the Cambrian. As the Cambrian strata drew to a close, the tapestry of life on Earth turned to a new chapter. From the first hesitant cells in the primordial ocean, through the stage of forming simple colonies and multicellular organisms, to the morphological explosion of the Cambrian, all the elements seem to have converged to usher in the era of vertebrates, corals, algae, and tens of thousands of other species. The origin of life and the first rhythm of evolution concluded like a slow but majestic symphony. The opening notes have sounded, but the journey is long, carrying us from the ocean to the land, from water-adapted swimmers to the plants and animals that would come to dominate the new world. As sunlight, penetrated ever deeper into the now stabilized atmosphere, and land temperatures were no longer as harsh as in the beginning. A new, fragile chapter of evolution unfolded, the conquest of the land. Previously, the ocean was the only realm sustaining life. Now, the damp stretches near the coast, the sheer rock faces, and the flat ground between streams became the promised land for the first creatures venturing from their marine home. Signals of the shallow shelf. From the shallow waters, where the sea's waves gently lapped against the reefs, a few strands of unicellular and multicellular algae flourished, anchoring themselves to the ancient biofilm. Sunlight drove photosynthesis, creating a rich layer of food at the land's edge. It was at this water-air interface that the first green algae, chlorophytes, broke through, and suddenly individuals appeared that could cling longer, thanks to simple anchoring filaments resembling roots. Gradually, as the tide receded, these algal mats retained enough moisture to sustain photosynthesis. They became the precursors to terrestrial plants, harnessing light and minerals from the rock while evading the deep-sea predators. Fungi and ancient animals advanced together. Not only plants, but fungi also joined the first foray onto land. Composed primarily of durable chitin, fungi began to colonize damp rock surfaces and scattered leaf litter. They secreted enzymes to decompose organic matter, extracting nutrients from the remains of marine organisms washed ashore, and exchanged with unicellular algae, laying the groundwork for the later symbiotic relationships between plant roots and mycorrhizal fungi. At the same time, the first animals to leave the water were small aquatic arthropods, the primitive insects. They used their tiny appendages to climb onto the mudflats at the water's edge, opening their mouths to take in water and food. Thanks to a thicker epidermis, their rudimentary respiratory structures, the carapace, functioned under an oxygenated atmosphere. Although true legs had not yet formed, this was the beginning of the sky-filled world of insects to come. The formation of primitive roots, stems, and leaves in the brilliant sunlight. Some multicellular algae evolved into lower plants, mosses, bryophytes. Their stems were short, only a few millimeters to a few centimeters tall, but already had a branching structure that formed a canopy covering the ground and retained moisture. Their rhizoids, root-like filaments, clung to rock surfaces or thin soil layers, absorbing water and minerals. The delicate leaf-like structures, only one cell layer thick, were sufficient to capture light and carry out photosynthesis. Beneath the moss, early root fungi formed a mycorrhizal network, exchanging water and minerals for organic nutrients. This symbiosis was the key that allowed mosses to expand rapidly, creating the first lush green carpet of vegetation on land. Diversification of lower plants. As mosses expanded, they gradually produced successive layers of organic matter upon dying, forming the first humus layer. Humus retains water and minerals, opening opportunities for higher plants, lycophytes and pteridophytes. These species appeared around 430 million years ago, possessing water-conducting vessels, xylem, and sieve tubes, phloem, that transport water, minerals, and photosynthetic products throughout the plant. The tiny club mosses grew in tufts, their stems forming tubes containing thick conducting vessels, reaching several tens of centimeters high to capture full sunlight. Ferns, with their broad, softly branching fronds, spread their canopies to create low fern grass forests. Seeds had not yet appeared. Reproduction still relied on wind-dispersed spores. but their vigorous reproductive capacity allowed them to dominate the moist zones near water sources. Climate changes and impacts on organisms. The colonization of land by plants made the Devonian climate less harsh. Plants absorbed CO2 and released O2, increasing oxygen levels in the atmosphere, while reducing the greenhouse effect. The earth became cooler, and dense fog blanketed the land surface, creating conditions for plants to spread farther from the shore. However, these climate changes also caused distress. Local droughts, soil erosion, and root fungus diseases emerged when water pooled beneath moss carpets. Only the species best adapted survived, leading to extremely harsh natural selection. Continuing the conquest. With the humus layer formed, abundant food sources, and a milder climate, the natural world took a great leap forward. Woody trees and seeds appeared. Animals moved strongly onto land, and the terrestrial food chain gradually stabilized. When young moss layers and fern carpets gradually receded toward the waterways, the higher plants began to assert their dominance. On the fertile, humus-rich soil, the first woody trees stretched skyward, marking the Carboniferous period, when the most magnificent primordial forests in Earth's history were erected. The emergence of primitive gymnosperms about 360 million years ago. Terrestrial plants entered a new chapter. The seed, a revolutionary reproductive method. Instead of fragile spores that required a moist environment to germinate, seeds enclosed an embryo and nutrient reserves within a sturdy coat able to withstand drought. Gymnosperm groups such as early conifers and lower gymnosperms, for example, Archaeopteris, began to supplant the fern forests. Archaeopteris, resembling a giant fern, but with a solid woody trunk reaching up to 6 meters tall and a broad canopy, had taken the first evolutionary step toward true wood. Its deep tap root system drew water from below, and its long branching fronds were optimized for photosynthesis under the low light of a dense forest canopy. Its seeds, although not yet encased in the thick shell seen later, were robust enough to endure strong winds and ultraviolet radiation, coal forests, and the gigantic carbon cycle. The primordial Carboniferous forests became a gigantic carbon-sucking machine. When the primitive gymnosperm trees and ferns died, the humus layer accumulated tens of meters thick, unable to decompose due to waterlogged, low oxygen conditions. Over millions of years, this humus was buried and transformed into coal, the fuel that humans would diligently mine later. The carbon cycle at that time was vastly different from today's. CO2 from the atmosphere was absorbed by plants and stored as fossils, causing Earth's climate to grow progressively cooler. The brackish rivers and the humid coal plains became ideal habitats for the very first land-dwelling animals. The expansion of insects on the waterlogged land, countless species of insects giant by today's standards appeared. Dragonflies with wingspans up to 75 centimeters, beetles as large as a fist, and earthworms reaching up to 2 meters in length. The main cause was the high oxygen concentration in the atmosphere, up to 35 to 40% compared to today's 21%, which made the insect tracheal respiratory system function efficiently at large sizes. Insects exploited many ecological niches. The graceful newly emerged wasp hunted the primitive nectar of gymnosperms. The mantis shrimps crept slowly across the humus. Long-horned beetles climbed tree trunks, transporting mycorrhizal spores. Cicadas shrieked through the flooded forest to attract mates. This diversity not only challenged predators, but also drove defensive strategies. Hard exoskeletons, sharp spines, and the secretion of toxins, the first steps of vertebrates onto land. Vertebrates, evolving from finned fish, gradually became primitive amphibians, ichthyostega and acanthostega, creatures about 1 meter long, possess limbs with webbed feet, sturdy vertebral bones, and rudimentary lungs alongside gills. They tentatively stepped onto the muddy riverbanks, seeking food such as small crustaceans and waiting insects. These primitive amphibians still depended on water for reproduction. Their shell-less eggs had to be laid in moist environments, but the ability to both swim and crawl between two realms, water and land, marked an important advance. Access to new food sources, avoidance of some aquatic predators, and creation of rich habitats for the next generation. As vertebrates and insects successfully ventured onto land, the terrestrial food chain gradually completed. Insects fed on plants, amphibians fed on insects, and some larger amphibians became top predators. Mammalian fur had not yet appeared, but thick skin and sebaceous glands retained moisture and prevented water loss. The land now featured diverse terrains: peat swamps, red earth hills, riverbank mudflats, all playgrounds for the pioneering creatures. Challenges of drought and radiation. When woody plants covered the plains, their dense canopy reduced water evaporation, sometimes causing brief droughts. Terrestrial animals had to find moist refuges or develop protective mechanisms. Some amphibians learned to burrow into mud pits, sealing themselves with a thick layer of mucus, remaining inactive until the rains returned. This can be seen as the origin of estivation in certain later species. Looking back at the journey of land conquest, from the algal mats clinging to rocks, root fungi weaving through the humus, to the vast coal forests and the immense realm of insects, the Carboniferous witnessed the land conquest that was arduous yet truly remarkable. The aquatic world that once favored life now expanded into a new landscape, full of sunlight, wind, and earthen pathways. As you let yourself drift into sleep, imagine the ancient aquatic trees bending their trunks with the receding waters, the giant dragonflies skimming their wings through the air, and the tiny creatures taking their first steps on the slippery rock ledges along the shore. That is the first melody of the land, echoing through hundreds of millions of years, guiding all species today. When the woody plants and the magnificent coal forests of the Carboniferous receded into the past, the evolutionary landscape on land shifted once again. The green shoots of flowering plants, early angiosperms, had not yet appeared, but the mark of gymnosperms' thick skin and shelled eggs had already begun a new era, the Permian period. In the cool air, moisture seeped through the towering canopy, and the pioneering terrestrial creatures left their most important imprint: the emergence of the amniote. Class until the end of the Carboniferous, amphibians still depended on water to reproduce. Their eggs could not withstand desiccation, forcing them to hide at the swamp's edge. But some small amphibian lineages began to experiment with membranous eggs, amniotes, clad in a thin, leathery shell that prevented water loss while still permitting gas exchange. Thanks to this mechanism, they could reproduce far from water sources, right in the midst of the humus-laden jungles. The first amniotes resembled small lizards covered in scales with compact bodies, yet already possessed lungs more efficient than those of amphibians. They carved paths through the vegetation, preying on insects and small crustaceans. Their independence from water opened up countless new ecological niches, from dry rocky crevices and hilltops to the dense low undergrowth beneath the coal forest canopy. Primitive mammals and early reptiles at the same time. one amniote lineage evolved in a different direction, developing simple mammary glands under the skin to secrete nourishment for embryos, the precursor to mammals. The family Morganocodontidae, only a few tens of centimeters long and as slender as mice, were nocturnal under the coal forest canopy, feeding on insects and fungal spores that fell to the ground. Because food was abundant and predators scarce, this group began to increase in body size and develop differentiated teeth for crushing hard food, preparing for later dominance of countless species. In another direction, the early reptiles, reptilia, expanded vigorously. Species like Dimetrodon and Edaphosaurus had strange appearances, large sail-like fins standing upright along their backs to regulate temperature. When the morning sun filtered through the towering tree canopy, they angled their sails to absorb heat quickly and kickstart digestion. At the blazing noon, they tilted their sails to limit heat intake. This heat-gathering and dissipating strategy enabled them to be more active than any amphibian or reptile before them. Primitive mammals and ancient reptiles at the same time. One amniote lineage evolved in a different direction, developing simple mammary glands beneath the skin, secreting nourishment for the embryo, the precursor of mammals. The family Morganocodontidae, only a few tens of centimeters long and as slender as mice, were nocturnal under the coal forest canopy, feeding on insects and fungal spores that fell to the ground. Because food was abundant and predators few, this group began to increase in body size and develop differentiated teeth to crush hard food, preparing for their later dominance of countless species. In another direction, the ancient reptiles, reptilia, expanded vigorously. Species like Dimetrodon and Edaphosaurus had strange appearances, large, sail-like dorsal fins standing upright on their backs to regulate temperature. When the morning sun shone through the towering coal forest trees, they absorbed heat quickly to kickstart digestion. At the blazing noon, they tilted their sails at an angle to limit heat intake. This heat-gathering and dissipating strategy allowed them to be more active than any amphibian or reptile before them. Permian forests and gymnosperm plains. By the end of the Carboniferous, gymnosperm plants covered the damp ground. Moving into the Permian, they diversified into needle-leaved trees, globular conifers, and tall branching forms, creating open forests interwoven with the old coal forests. In areas of strong light, cordites, tall, straight-trunked trees with long sword-like leaves, stood shoulder to shoulder with the earliest conifers. In darker, more humid spots, large ferns still crept through, their spores continuing to be wind-dispersed as they coexisted with mosses and terrestrial algae. The Permian forests were not only magnificent, but also gloomy. Their dense canopy made it difficult for sunlight to reach the forest floor, leaving only dappled patches of light. In that darkness, small animals foraged and hid. Occasionally, the faint roar of a Dimetrodon echoed through the night as it hunted, tore its prey apart, and then vanished into the mist. Great catastrophe. The Permian-Triassic extinction event, but right at this climax, a catastrophic turning point struck. The Permian-Triassic mass extinction event, about 252 million years ago. The primitive mammals and ancient reptiles lost up to 90% of their species, and the coal forests and gymnosperm forests withered. The cause may have been the continuous eruptions of the Siberian traps, releasing toxic gases, altering the global climate, and causing both terrestrial and marine ecosystems to collapse. Small amniotes hid in deep caves and among tree roots, preserving their core lineages thanks to their ability to withstand extreme drought and maintain diverse diets. When the land regenerated, ecological gaps opened, creating opportunities for the surviving amniote branches to flourish, prelude to the Triassic and signs of renewal. As the volcanic smoke clouds gradually cleared, the Permian forests recovered, but were no longer as before. Instead, conifers and ferns initially dominated, before flowering plants appeared in the Triassic. The primitive mammals emerged from their burrows to reclaim food sources. Triassic reptiles, the precursors of dinosaurs, rapidly proliferated, occupying vast territories. The Triassic forests were relatively open, with stronger diffused light penetrating to the ground, creating conditions for the first seed plants, Bennett Italians, to spread. Primitive oaks and early birches, with seeds protected by bracts, heralded a plant revolution even greater than the coal forests. Looking ahead, the dawn of the Triassic, a tragic heroic symphony of rise, collapse, and rebirth. From the majestic coal forests, through the somber Permian woodlands, into the abyss of extinction and the dawn of the Triassic, terrestrial evolution has proven its boundless resilience. As you close your eyes and hear your heartbeat, imagine the volcanic ash clouds drifting in haze, incandescent boulders hurtling across the leaf litter, then gradually dissipating to make room for new sprouts of life. The Triassic dawn on land will blaze forth, as plants and creatures emerge from death to touch once more the dream of living. When the first rays of sunlight broke over the Triassic horizon, Earth was no longer the ruins left by the fierce Permian-Triassic catastrophe, but it had not yet fully recovered as before. The vast continent Pangaea rolled beneath a clear sky, its climate alternately hot and dry with sudden storms, setting the stage anew for the domination of reptiles. In the morning's misty veil, the very first creatures tentatively tested the wet ground and the coastal deserts, marking a phase both challenging and thrilling. Pangaea, a vast continent and harsh climate. The Triassic, about 252-201 million years ago, was defined by Pangaea, the single supercontinent on Earth. From the equator to high latitudes, no inland seas divided it, so the climate became vast but arid. Daytime temperatures could reach 40-45 degrees, then plunge abruptly at night. Summer rains flooded valleys, only to evaporate rapidly under the sweltering heat. In that scene, vegetation still existed, but was not as dense as in the Carboniferous or Permian. Gymnosperm conifers, drought-tolerant ferns, cordytes and Bennetitalians stood side by side. Under our imagined footsteps, red sand rose in billows, slipping into skin creases, awakening the senses with the scent of hot earth and dry pine resin. Archosaurs, ancestors of dinosaurs and crocodiles. As Permian-Triassic rulers declined, a vast group of reptiles, archosaurs, quickly filled ecological niches. Archosaurs split into two main branches, one toward the early crocodilians, water-dwelling reptiles, the other toward bipedal vertebrates, including the earliest dinosaurs. Triassic crocodile relatives, like the phytosaurs, resembled modern crocodiles but with elongated snouts. Living primarily in fresh water, they hunted by stealthily gliding beneath the surface, then erupting spectacularly to snatch unsuspecting prey. Meanwhile, the first bipedal archosaurs, such as the small Herrerasaurus and Eoraptor, only 1-2 meters long, stood upright on long hind limbs with shorter forelimbs, marking the first step toward true dinosaurs. The emergence of primitive dinosaurs. The earliest dinosaurs were not giant, fearsome beasts, but agile, clever hunters. Eoraptor, the dawn predator, with his light frame and sharp teeth, moved nimbly among fern thickets. It used keen vision and quick reflexes to snatch large insects or small amphibians. Herrerasaurus, appearing later and up to 3 meters long, stood on sturdy hind legs with flexible, clawed forelimbs. It occupied the top of the Triassic terrestrial food chain, yet still had to watch for phytosaurs and other sprawling reptiles. Though small compared to later dinosaurs, they laid the first bricks for a dinosaurian reign lasting over 160 million years. Primitive mammals of the Triassic. Morning gleam. Amid Pangaea's arid expanse appeared the small morganeucodontids, the earliest mammals. Under 20 centimeters long, with soft grey fur and bright eyes, they slipped into shaded trees to forage for insects and Bennettitalian seeds. Unlike reptiles, they had a single jawbone and 3 small middle ear bones, enabling delicate hearing. Morganeucodon, the representative genus, was nocturnal, sheltering in rock crevices or root nests, using simple maternal milk glands to nourish its young. The harsh climate forced it to store food in cheek pouches, stocking its burrow for the dry season. This was the beginning of warm-bloodedness and milk nurturing, traits later perfected by true mammals. Ecological interactions and competition. Although archosaurs and small mammals coexisted, their relationship was not harmonious. Triassic mammals kept away from primitive dinosaurs and crocodilians, choosing forest edges and rocky outcrops. They developed dexterous claws, especially elongated hind claws, for agile climbing. Burrow networks in the parched earth became their secret realms. Meanwhile, bipedal archosaurs grew ever stronger, 4-legged archosaurs, crocodile forerunners, dominated rivers and swamps. Each group recognized its limits, leading to ecological partitioning, a condition allowing both to specialize without direct competition. Life and reproduction. Dinosaurs and archosaurs laid eggs in soil nests or low tree hollows, surrounding them with dry leaves for protection. Their eggshells were thicker than those of amphibians, preventing water loss and buffering temperature swings. Triassic mammals, though feeding their young milk, still laid soft-shelled eggs, incubating them in warm burrows. Hatchlings emerged with deciduous teeth, able to follow their mother to forage immediately. Parental care in Triassic mammals was the forerunner of later family bonds. They developed soft calls to communicate during hunts, while primitive dinosaurs could gather in small packs to hunt together. Under the arid Triassic sky, as Pangaea began to fracture into smaller continents, primitive dinosaurs and early mammals kindled hope for survival and growth. Together, they penned the first chapter of the Triassic, where reptilian rulers reigned and the warm glow of mammals marched alongside. As the first cracks split Pangaea into Laurasia and Gondwana, the Triassic climate shifted, from scorching aridity to wetter conditions with more rainfall in certain regions. The central zones, ancient fern forests, Bennettitalians, and gymnosperm conifers, grew lush again, expanding living space for countless species. This was the era when dinosaurs truly began to flourish, gaining the evolutionary edge. 2-legged dinosaurs expand their domain. Herrerasaurus and Eoraptor were only the beginning. Now primitive theropods such as Colaphysis appeared, slender, about 3 meters long, with hind limbs as nimble as a lynx's. They hunted in packs, agile and coordinated, capable of encircling prey. Hollow bone structures reduced weight, allowing them to run at speeds of 40 or 50 km beneath the dense canopy. The lone footsteps of Coelophysis echoed sparsely, their soft calls reverberating off tree trunks. They became the phantoms of Triassic forests, preying on Triassic rodents, small keratodes, thick-bodied lizards, and even one another when resources ran scarce. The rise of four-legged dinosaurs, not only bipeds, the sauropodomorph lineage also began to develop. Plateosaurus, up to 4 to 5 meters tall when stretching its neck, fed on conifer needles and ferns. Its long neck reached high foliage. Specialized teeth ground fibrous leaves. They moved slowly, in herds, forging green march routes across the Triassic landscape. Large claws helped them dig for roots, tapping into groundwater and essential minerals. A herd of Plateosaurus, necks stretched high and massive bodies casting shadows in the morning mist, evoked the grandeur of Triassic forests and foreshadowed the later dominance of giant dinosaurs. Small raptors and the first feathers. At the same time, a branch of small theropods began to develop arm feathers, primitive down at their finger joints, helping them balance when leaping and climbing. Species like Epidexipteryx in the late Triassic may have used these feathers for thermoregulation or mating displays, laying the groundwork for Jurassic birds. Diverse climate and vegetation. With increased rainfall in Laurasia, humid corridors formed. Mixed Bennettitalian conifer forests intertwined with giant fern swamps. Shallow lakes teemed with ancient fish and winged crustaceans, prime food for amphibians and early crocodilians. Meanwhile, Gondwana remained arid, dotted with drought-tolerant conifers and low Bennettitalian thickets. This vegetation mosaic created distinct ecological corridors. Dinosaurs and small mammals favored damp forests, while early crocodilians preferred swamps and rivers. Such diversity prevented direct competition and allowed each group to specialize. Continued evolution of primitive mammals, Morganucodon and other Morganucodontids after the Triassic, expanded into new forms. Megazostrodon emerged in the late Triassic, larger at 25 to 30 centimeters, with big eyes and acute hearing and smell. They hunted large nocturnal insects, used specialized teeth to crush tough shells, and slender claws to dig deep burrows. The combination of milk glands, insulating down, and keen hearing set the stage for mammalian diversification in the upcoming Jurassic. At night, their soft murmurs echoed through rock crevices like a natural lullaby, beckoning peaceful dreams. Crocodilians and amphibians coexist. Four-legged archosaurs, like phytosaurs, continued to dominate freshwater habitats, while giant amphibians, such as Metoposaurus, over 2 meters long, flat bodies, rough skin, lurked in muddy lake bottoms, exposing only eyes and nostrils. When prey approached, they lunged with powerful jaws. Competition between early crocodilians and giant amphibians maintained ecological balance. When one group expanded, the other self-regulated its numbers through food competition or changes in hunting behavior. New food webs and relationships. The first herbivorous dinosaurs like Plateosaurus produced nutrient-rich dung that fueled soil microbes and fungi. Soft vegetation flourished on dinosaur dung, feeding small amphibians and primitive mammals. This established new terrestrial food chains, enhancing ecosystem stability. As dusk fell, dinosaurs roamed everywhere, from small bipedal predators to herds of giant herbivores. Primitive mammals survived quietly in the darkness. Early crocodilians patrolled the water's edge, and giant amphibians lay in wait under the lake surface. Each group, with its own skills and strategies, continued writing the epic of evolution on a continent in transformation. When the first cracks began to split Pangaea into Laurasia and Gondwana, the Triassic climate shifted, from blazing aridity to wetter conditions with heavier rainfall in some regions. The central zones, ancient fern forests, Bennettitalians, and gymnosperm conifers, grew lush, expanding habitats for countless species. This was the phase when dinosaurs truly began to flourish, seizing the evolutionary advantage. Two-legged dinosaurs expand their domain. Herrerasaurus and Eoraptor were only the beginning. Primitive theropods like Coelophysis now appeared, slender, about 3 meters long, with hind limbs as nimble as a lynx. They hunted in packs, agile and coordinated, capable of encircling prey. Hollow bone structures reduced weight, allowing them to run at speeds of 40 or 50 km/h. Under the dense canopy, the isolated footfalls of Coelophysis rang out, and their whispered calls echoed against the trunks. They became the ghosts of the Triassic forest, preying on Triassic rodents, small ceratodus, thick-bodied lizards, and, when resources were scarce, even one another. The rise of four-legged dinosaurs, not only bipeds, but sauropodomorphs, also began to grow. Plateosaurus, up to 4 to 5 meters tall when stretching its neck, fed on conifer needles and ferns. Its long neck allowed it to browse high foliage. Its specialized teeth ground tough leaves. They moved slowly in herds, carving green march routes across the Triassic plains. Large claws helped them dig for roots, tapping into groundwater and essential minerals. A procession of Plateosaurus, necks extended high and massive bodies casting shadows through the morning mist, conveyed the grandeur of the Triassic forest and foreshadowed the later dominance of giant dinosaurs. Small raptors and the first feathers. At the same time, a branch of small theropods began to develop proto-feathers, simple down along their finger bones that helped with balance during leaps and climbs. Species like Epidexipterix in the late Triassic may have used these filaments for warmth or mating displays, laying the groundwork for the Jurassic's first birds. Diverse climate and vegetation. With increased rainfall in Laurasia, humid corridors formed. Mixed forests of Bennettitalians and conifers interspersed with giant fern swamps. Shallow lakes teemed with ancient fish and winged crustaceans, the preferred prey of amphibians and early crocodilians. Meanwhile, Gondwana remained dry, dotted with drought-tolerant conifers and low Bennettitalian thickets. This patchwork of vegetation created distinct ecological corridors. Dinosaurs and small mammals favored damp forests, while early crocodilians thrived in swamps and rivers. Such diversity prevented direct competition and allowed each group to specialize. Continued evolution of primitive mammals, Morganucodon and other Morganucodontids of the late Triassic, began to diversify further. Megazostrodon appeared, larger at about 25 to 30 centimeters with big eyes and extremely acute hearing and smell. They hunted large nocturnal insects, used specialized teeth to crush hard shells, and slender claws to excavate deep burrows. The combination of milk glands insulating proto-fur and sharp hearing set the stage for mammalian diversification in the upcoming Jurassic. At night, their soft murmurs drifted through rocky crevices like a natural lullaby, lulling the world to peaceful dreams. Crocodilians and amphibians coexist four-legged archosaurs, like phytosaurs, continued to dominate freshwater habitats, while giant amphibians, such as Metaposaurus, over 2 meters long, flat bodies, rough skin, lurked in muddy lake bottoms, leaving only eyes and nostrils exposed. When prey approached, they lunged with powerful jaws. The competition between early crocodilians and giant amphibians maintained ecological balance. As one group expanded, the other regulated its numbers through competition for food or shifts in hunting behavior. Interwoven food webs. The late Triassic ecosystem was a complex network. After summer rains, Bennettitalians and ferns sprouted anew on old coal humus. Insects invaded fresh leaves, attracting Coelophysis and Liliensternus. Nutrient-rich dinosaur dung fostered root fungi, feeding terrestrial algae and bacteria. This world was both wild and harmonious in its fragile equilibrium. As night fell and the Jurassic dawn began to break, Gondwana and Laurasia stood distinctly divided, opening new habitats. Larger dinosaurs, more agile pterosaurs, and warm-blooded mammals adapted to a range of climates. Chapter 3 closes like a grand symphony of reptiles. From humble beginnings to the pinnacle of power, the faint Jurassic dawn illuminates limestone ranges and vast valleys as Laurasia and Gondwana continued to drift apart. Warm, shallow inland seas opened up. A milder, more humid, and less variable climate than the Triassic prevailed, creating ideal conditions for giant reptiles to rise and dominate every ecological layer. New climate and topography Pangaea was now broken into fragments. Central Europe lay flooded beneath the Tethys Inland Sea. North America stretched from semi-arid deserts to deeply indented coastlines. Gondwana extended southward, with Madagascar and India still attached to the main landmass. Rainfall increased, with average continental humidity around 65 to 75%, giving rise to vast conifer forests and moist grasslands. This diverse terrain, mountains, valleys, floodplains, combined with a temperate, humid climate to form numerous ecological oases. Dense, mysterious woodlands, sunlit meadows, warm coastal lagoons. These changes not only spurred dinosaur evolution, but also encouraged diversification among plants, insects, birds, and mammals. The zenith of primitive sauropods, the early Jurassic witnessed the mighty expansion of primitive sauropods, the long-necked, pillar-limbed giants. Volcanodon and Barapasaurus, over 10 meters long with lofty necks, browsed on high conifer and fern fronds. Hollow bones reduced weight, while expansive digestive systems held dozens of liters of plant fiber, aided by symbiotic gut bacteria that broke down cellulose. Herds of Volcanodon moved slowly in columns, their gentle footfalls trembling branches and scattering insects. Barapasaurus groups formed mother and juvenile units. Adult males sometimes clashed neck and neck to display strength and compete for mates. Heavy breathing echoed through the deep forest, evoking one of the most majestic scenes in Earth's history. Increasing specialization of theropods, meanwhile. Two-legged carnivores grew more sophisticated. Megalosaurus, one of the first large theropods, reached about 7 meters in length, with long curved teeth and sturdy leg musculature that allowed it to chase prey at roughly 30-35 km/h. Its powerful hips and thighs enabled it to topple young sauropods and scavenge large carcasses. Smaller species like Dilophosaurus, with twin crests on the skull, likely used them for display or threat. They hunted in small packs, coordinating assaults on herbivores and even feeding on the massive marine reptiles washed ashore along Tethys' coast. The emergence of advanced herbivorous dinosaurs, alongside sauropods, the nascent ornithischians began to appear. Coelodosaurus, about 4 meters long, bore rows of armor plates along its back to guard against theropod attacks. It grazed on ferns, bennettitalians, and coastal algae, methodically chewing each mouthful, its beak producing a distinctive crunch across the forest floor. Within this group, the later Thescelosaurus and Lesothosaurus lineages were small, agile, and possessed, and the beak-like snouts for cropping leaves, with malariform teeth for grinding, laying the foundation for later armored and duck-billed dinosaurs, evolution of insects and primitive moths. Not only dinosaurs but Jurassic insects flourished. Primitive beetles of the Rhopalocerata, with partially transparent wings, began to dominate bennettitalian blossoms, sipping their early nectar. Primitive moths also emerged, fluttering under moonlight to find night-blooming flowers. Aeomeristes species, with wingspans up to 15 centimeters, bore star-like patterns that camouflaged them from predatory birds. Simultaneously, ancestral social wasps, Melitus fex, started building small clay nests on tree trunks, establishing the first pollinator-plant interaction with early flowering plants at the forest edge. Jurassic coral reefs and marine life in the warm inland seas. Life teemed beneath the blue waters. Jurassic reefs, built by plate corals like Lobophilia and pillar corals like Actinostrea, formed extensive biogenic structures, nurturing ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs. Ichthyosaurs such as Stenopterygius, over 4 meters long and dolphin-shaped, with an arched back and crescent tail, generated powerful thrusts to reach speeds of 50 km by km plesiosaurs, with long necks and small heads, hunted fish and crustaceans. Meanwhile, ammonites, spiraled fossil cephalopods, proliferated across the sea floor, serving as key prey for many marine reptiles. The first birds and feather evolution. By the end of this phase, true feathers appeared on some small theropods, the forerunners of Archaeopteryx. Downy filaments began to function in insulation and display, stabilizing the body during rapid runs or leaps from branches. This marked the birth of winged animals, the prelude to the upcoming Cretaceous. Reproduction and care of the next generation. Most Jurassic dinosaurs continued laying eggs in clay nests or leaf-lined scrapes, incubating them by geothermal heat or sun exposure. Primitive mammals like Haldanodon brooded their eggs in burrows and nursed their young for several weeks before leaving them to fend for themselves. Though rudimentary, this parental care greatly enhanced juvenile survival compared to hatchling dinosaurs. End of Chapter 4, Part 1. As the pink twilights of the Jurassic fell, the hush of the forest mingled with the roar of Megalosaurus and the chirr of nocturnal moths across the continent. Chapter 4, Part 1 closes on a vivid tableau. 4- and 2-legged dinosaurs dominating every niche. Proto-birds gliding overhead, and marine realms brimming with life. As the hazy Jurassic dawn spread its light across limestone ridges and vast valleys, the world of dinosaurs entered its glorious phase. Towering conifer forests, thickets of bennettitalians, and drooping fern canopies painted a boundless emerald landscape. Against this backdrop, myriad ancient reptiles of all sizes displayed their strength and agility, composing the most vibrant ecological tableau in Earth's history. Sauropod monarchs, Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus, amid the colossal woodland, 2 kings of sauropods emerged. Brachiosaurus, with its neck held vertically like a sunlit tower, and Diplodocus, stretching its neck horizontally and sweeping dense undergrowth with its long tail. Brachiosaurus reached 13 to 15 meters high when its neck was fully extended, biting off lofty conifer fronds, with its wedge-shaped teeth crushing fibrous leaves. Diplodocus, up to 25 meters long, had a gracefully curved neck and tail, a more slender build, and surprising nimbleness, enabling herds to traverse expansive marshlands. The migration of Brachiosaurus painted slow brushstrokes on the earth. Each step of Diplodocus gently quivered the fern fronds. These vast, four-legged giants marched together across shallow rivers and through damp grasslands in search of fresh saplings. Stegosaurs, the armored knights of the Jura. In the dense shade, Stegosaurs waded lightly through shallow floodwaters. Stegosaurus stood out with 2 rows of upright bony plates along its back, which it could angle to absorb or dissipate heat. Its tail bore stout spikes, the thagomizer, ready to swing defensively at any threat. Smaller relatives like Kentrosaurus, with shorter spikes but greater agility, moved in small herds to forage and guard their young. Their alternating plates, like overlapping copper-hued shingles shimmering in dappled sunlight, created a scene both formidable and graceful. As the herd bent to graze on ferns and low bennettitalians, the clatter of armor plates clinking together echoed through the forest. Giant predators, Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus, not far off, the roars of apex predators reverberated. Allosaurus, nearly 4 meters tall at the hip, possessed serrated teeth and powerful forelimbs with 3 dagger-like claws. Its hunting strategy relied on ambush, bursting forth at astonishing speed to overpower prey in a crushing grip. Ceratosaurus, smaller but muscular, bore rough hornlets on its snout and spiny scales along its back, giving it a fierce appearance. They hunted cooperatively in small packs, sometimes encircling young stegosaurs or newly hatched dinosaurs. The victim's roars and the predator's snarls resonated through the woodlands. Feathered flight. From Archaeopteryx to Anchiornis, amid the leaf-shrouded canopy, small birds began to take flight. Archaeopteryx, with fully formed feathers, long wings and tail, glided from branch to snatch insects. Soon after, Anchiornis appeared with more vibrant, down, using its small wings to control its descent when leaping from treetops. The soft whoosh of wings rippled through the leaves, intermingled with calls to fellow flock members. The rise of birds marked the transition toward the Cretaceous, when feathers would perfect both flight and insulation. Swamps and coastal realms. Plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs thrive along warm coastal lagoons. Plesiosaurs still thrived, gliding beneath the water with long necks and 4 paddle-like limbs. Plesiosaurus and Cryptoclidus prowled shallow waters, preying on small fish, crustaceans, and even ammonites. Meanwhile, ichthyosaurs like Ophthalmosaurus, with enormous, headlight-like eyes, scoured the darker depths in search of prey. The swish of paddles and the hiss of exhalations as they surfaced composed a grand aquatic symphony, evoking the mysterious oceans of the Jurassic. Small mammals and the diversity of nocturnal whispers. In caves and rock crevices, small Jurassic mammals such as Triconodon and Haldanodon found refuge. Covered in thick down, no larger than modern squirrels, they used sharp claws for climbing and digging burrows. By night, their soft chee-chee calls echoed everywhere like nature's lullaby. The diversity of these small mammals laid the groundwork for true mammals of the Cretaceous, when a host of species would exploit the ecological niches left by declining dinosaurs. first pollinating insects and flowers. Under the forest canopy, the simple blooms of early flowering plants such as Archifructus unfurled. Though lacking showy petals, they attracted wasps building clay nests and nocturnal moths for pollination. This first pollination sparked a long-lasting symbiosis between insects and flowering plants, setting the stage for the Cretaceous angiosperm explosion. Reproduction and parental care. Most Jurassic dinosaurs still laid large clutches of eggs, but some smaller species began rudimentary nest attendance. Maiasaura, though famed in the Cretaceous, may have had primitive nests in the late Jurassic, protecting eggs and chicks by shading them and cooling softly. Small mammals continued to nurse their young with simple maternal milk, feeding them during their first weeks before encouraging independent foraging. As the final years of the Jurassic saw Laurasia and Gondwana continue to drift apart, the dinosaur world and its fellow creatures reached their last great flourishing. The vast Tethys inland sea stretched like a ribbon of blue. Conifer and Benedictalian forests cloaked the valleys, and damp grasslands crept up the mountain bases. In this realm, countless species had honed their survival skills and readied themselves for the coming great geological turn. The apex of four-legged sauropods, in the primeval woods, the ultimate sauropods such as Apatosaurus and Brachiosaurus had perfected every advantage. Necks raised to pluck fresh leaves, optimized digestive tracts able to break down cellulose, and hollow bone architecture supporting their immense bulk. Herds of Apatosaurus moved slowly in columns, each footfall echoing like an ocean drumbeat, rooting through soil for saplings and underground water during dry seasons. Brachiosaurus, with its upright posture, became the high canopy forager, while Diplodocus and Barosaurus slithered beneath lower branches to feed on Benedictalian undergrowth. This stratification of feeding heights allowed dozens of giant sauropod species to coexist in the same region. Land's top predators, theropods. The zenith of theropods came with Ceratosaurus, Allosaurus, and Torvosaurus. Allosaurus, the lion of the Jurassic, boasted serrated teeth and powerful jaws capable of ripping flesh from juvenile sauropods. Torvosaurus stood out for its sheer size, up to 11 meters long and weighing over 4 tons, its sturdy gait carrying it confidently through riverbank mud. Ceratosaurus, with its distinctive nasal horn, used it not only to intimidate rivals, but also in territorial battles. They hunted in small packs, coordinating encirclements of young stegosaurs or newly hatched dinosaurs, their snarls and praise screams resounding through the ancient forest. Feathers and early birds. Prelude to the Cretaceous, the late Jurassic witnessed a profusion of feathers and primitive birds. Archaeopteryx continued to refine its large wings, while species like Anchiornis and Xiaotingia sported colorful feather patterns on their wings and tails to attract mates. Feathers provided insulation and helped control airflow during glides between branches, preparing the path for true flight in the coming Cretaceous. Perhaps the most serene sight was a flock of these early birds singing their dawn chorus in the dappled sunlight, mammals carving niches amid giants. Amid the dinosaur reign, small mammals such as Haldanodon, Triconodon, and Docodon lived quietly in burrows and root tangles. They adopted omnivorous diets, eating insects, arthropods, and occasionally fallen fruit and Benedictalian seeds. Their thick down and rudimentary milk glands allowed their young to grow quickly. These tiny survivors played key roles in decomposing dinosaur carcasses and set the stage for evolutionary bursts that would define them: Cretaceous, Jurassic seas, giants of the inland waters, In the inland seas, plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs still ruled. Leopleurodon, a large killer plesiosaur, reached 7 to 8 meters, its massive jaws crushing sharks and ammonites. Ophthalmosaurus continued to dive deep in search of prey, its enormous eyes casting beams through the dark water. New marine reptiles like Metriorhynchus, the ancient sea crocodile, also appeared, their limbs transformed into paddles, often hunting in groups. Jurassic coral reefs expanded, supporting diverse life from mollusks and beaked fishes to giant crustaceans. Early flowering plants, seeds of the Cretaceous explosion. By late Jurassic, the first flowering plants such as Archifructus and Montsechia emerged along flooded lake margins. Their simple flowers, though lacking showy petals, bore both stamens and protected ovules. They thrived in moist settings and attracted early pollinating insects. Though still underbrush and outcompeted by Bennettitalians, this was the spark of the Cretaceous flowering plant revolution, when blossoms would blanket the continents in vibrant color. The transitional event, preparing for the Cretaceous in the late Jurassic, fluctuating sea levels flooded and drained the inland seas, eroding reefs and swamps. Some final dinosaur groups, like Stegosaurus and certain Allosaurus species, dwindled from the fossil record. Meanwhile, sauropods such as Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus declined, opening ecological space for new Cretaceous giants and mammals to thrive. This transition was not a mass extinction of Permian magnitude, but it silenced several top-tier species, paving the way for advanced dinosaurs and new mammals to rise in the Cretaceous. The Cretaceous dawn cast its light across vast valleys, painting vivid swaths of angiosperm forests and temperate grasslands. Pangaea had finally broken apart. Laurasia and Gondwana now stood as separate continents, interspersed by the warm, shallow Tethys Sea and the western interior seaway. A mild, humid, and relatively stable climate prevailed everywhere, setting the stage for the explosive spread of flowering plants, angiosperms, and a new era of prosperity for dinosaurs, birds, small mammals, and the once splendid oceans. Angiosperm forests expand thickets of Bennettitalians and conifers gradually gave way to expanses of flowering trees. New plant groups, such as the Magnolia phyta, appeared, with thin leaves, slender woody stems, and the first colorful blossoms. Simple flowers with faint petals and fluttering stamens attracted early worker wasps, Melitosfex, and moths like Duracimbroflebia for pollination. In the moisture-rich air, a dense green understory formed, its leaf canopy filtering dappled sunlight down onto a carpet, alive with blooms and butterflies. Each early angiosperm might have stood only 1 to 2 meters tall, but they reproduced rapidly and spread their seeds by wind and animal carriers. These flowering plant woodlands not only hosted a diversity of species, but also enriched the soil through symbiosis with mycorrhizal fungi, creating a thick humus layer that retained moisture. Advanced dinosaurs, from Tyrannosauroidea to Hadrosauridae. Across the plains and forests, advanced theropods of the Tyrannosauroid lineage emerged, forerunners of T. rex. They bore strong, serrated teeth, short but powerful forelimbs, and sturdy hindquarters. Hunting in pairs or small packs, they cooperated to encircle juvenile hadrosaurs, young ceratopsians, and occasionally scavenged large carcasses. Counterbalancing these predators, the duck-billed hadrosaurids roamed the grasslands. Iguanodon and Mantellisaurus, with broad beaks and ridged teeth specialized for grinding plant matter, moved in large herds, their rumbling steps traversing the muddy undergrowth. Muscular bodies and strong tails allowed them to rear up on hind legs to survey for danger, while thumb spikes served as defensive weapons. Ceratopsia and the decline of stegosaurs. Small ceratopsians like Psittacosaurus appeared, their necks covered in down, beaks parrot-like, feeding on insects and tender leaves. By the early Cretaceous, the Stegosauria faded away, making room for more advanced ceratopsians, lineages that would later give rise to Pachycephalosaurus and the great Triceratops. Bird evolution. From Enantiornithes to Hesperornithiformes. Early in the Cretaceous, Enantiornithes birds diversified across the sky. Species like Iberomessornis, with 20-30 centimeter wingspans, long forelimbs, and small claws for perching, snatched insects in flight. Meanwhile, the ancient seabirds, Hesperornithiformes, developed paddle-like hind limbs, lean bodies adapted to coastal lagoons, and dove deep to catch fish and tiny ammonites. Feathers evolved further. Insulating belly plumage and sturdy shafts allowed birds to fly farther and more stably. Their calls rang through the new canopy, signaling the breeding season and flock formation. Mammal diversification, Prototheria and Metatheria. In the dense shade, small Cretaceous mammals diversified into two branches, Prototheria, monotremens, and Metatheria, marsupial forerunners. Primitive monotremes, such as Steropodon, still laid eggs and lived near fresh water, using duck-like bills to flip over stones in search of insects. Early marsupialiforms like Cocopelea began to develop a post-birth pouch, nurturing their young within the mother's warm body. True placental mammals, Eutheria, also appeared, mouse-sized with soft down and specialized teeth. Early eutherians, such as Aphodon in Gondwana, exploited tiny ecological niches, climbing, burrowing, insect hunting, and feeding on angiosperm seeds. Cretaceous seas, mosasaurs and pliosaurs arise in the calm, warm oceans. The giant marine mosasaurs emerged in the mid-Cretaceous. Mosasaurus and Platecarpus were exceptionally agile, with long paddle-like limbs and powerful fluke tails, enabling deep dives to hunt late ichthyosaurs, early sharks, and smaller marine reptiles. Meanwhile, late Cretaceous pliosaurs such as Kronosaurus exceeded 10 meters, with massive jaws for preying on plesiosaurs, large fish, and even seabirds. Ammonites and belemnites underwent explosive diversification, offering a rich food source. High reef corals and sponges expanded too, providing shelter for fish and crustaceans. New food webs and ecosystem structure. With angiosperm spreading, vegetation formed multiple layers, low-flowering shrubs, mid-canopy conifers, and towering broadleaf trees. Low-browsing hadrosaurs, high-reaching sauropods, and mid-level ceratopsians partitioned resources. Stealthy theropods and insectivorous mammals patrolled their niches. Enantiornithine birds hunted in the canopy. Diving seabirds foraged offshore. In the seas, mosasaurs and pliosaurs reigned supreme. Reproduction and social behavior. Many early Cretaceous dinosaurs built sturdy ground nests, lined with dry leaves and twigs, even marking territory with branch scuffs. Hadrosaurs sometimes created nursery zones fenced with low shrubs to shield hatchlings. Enantiornithes nested on cliffs or hollowed trees, offering floral branch gifts to attract mates. Monotremes continued to incubate eggs while nursing with simple milk glands. Early metatherians carried their young in pouches and taught them to forage. Small eutherians gave birth to litters, capitalizing on abundant angiosperm seeds to feed multiple offspring. Thus dawned the Cretaceous, a kaleidoscope of flowering plants, soaring giants, and the first true mammals and birds, all setting the stage for the greatest biological flourishing in Earth's history. As the midday Cretaceous sun filtered through the dense angiosperm canopy, Laurasia and Gondwana entered an ecological explosion. Flowering plants blanketed grasslands, savannas, and coastal mangroves, providing the foundation for unparalleled biodiversity. In North America, the western interior seaway carved a coastline thousands of kilometers long, while in Gondwana, red deserts blazed with yellow Proteaceae blooms. Tyrannosaurus empire and apex predators in the late Cretaceous plains of North America, Maastrichtian, Tyrannosaurus rex emerged as the undisputed king. With a massive skull bearing teeth over 15 centimeters long and tiny but powerfully muscled forelimbs, T. rex could grasp, squeeze, and rend the flesh of its prey. Its roar thundered like a storm, driving herds of Triceratops to huddle in defensive circles. Yet it wasn't just solitary T. rex. The entire Tyrannosauridae family, including Tarbosaurus in Eurasia and Daspletosaurus, hunted in coordinated small packs, chasing hadrosaurs and juvenile ceratopsians. Their wild chases carved long furrows into the earth, a testament to their strength and hunting skill. Ceratopsian expansion. Alongside the tyrants roamed thousands of Triceratops, Centrosaurus, and Styracosaurus. Triceratops, with 2-meter-long brow horns and a sturdy nasal boss, formed the ultimate defensive shield, deterring any predator. In late Cretaceous Canada, herds of Centrosaurus migrated en masse, stamping the ground and bellowing like wartime drums. Styracosaurus, with its spiked frill, used its powerful beak to crush angiosperm fruits and hard seeds. A symbiosis with sap-feeding beetles kept their skin clean and provided a secondary food source for Enantiornithes birds and insectivorous mammals. Ankylosauria mobile fortresses in the lowlands of Eurasia and North America. Ankylosaurs like Ankylosaurus and Euplocephalus bore thick, rounded armor plates and massive tail clubs weighing hundreds of kilograms. When threatened, they crouched and swung their tails with bone-shattering force. Their uniform armor distributed impact, shielding them from tyrannosaur bites while retaining body heat during mild winters. Hadrosaurides' colors and calls, hadrosaurids, became more than duck-billed grazers. By the end of the Cretaceous, they had developed elaborate crests and resonating chambers in their skulls. Parasaurolophus, with its trombone-shaped crest, produced haunting calls that carried across the plains. Lambeosaurus and Corythosaurus, each with cone or semicircle-shaped crests, used these calls to summon herds, warn of danger, and attract mates. Butterflies, bees, and flower symbiosis, late Cretaceous angiosperms evolved showy petals, sweet fragrances, and rich nectar, attracting primitive butterflies, Papilionoidea, and social wasps, Formicinae. Moths like Cretaceobuthus filled the air at dusk, their silvery wings flashing under the moon as they fed on nighttime blooms. This floral feast was a survival anthem, with small mammals and honey-eating birds dispersing pollen and seeds for the next generation of plants. Early modern birds, beyond Enantiornithes, ornithomorpha birds, ancestors of today's birds, appeared. Ichthyornis soared over inland seas, catching fish in mid-air, while Hesperornis lost flight, developing long bills and paddle-like limbs to dive for prey in coastal lagoons. These two lineages exemplified avian diversification in both terrestrial and marine realms. Rapid mammalian evolution. In burrows and rock crevices, advanced eutherian mammals such as Similestes and Zalamdalestes emerged, mouse-sized with large eyes and acute hearing. Some began preying on small dinosaur eggs, prompting dinosaurs to develop tighter nest defenses. Exploiting the rich angiosperm leaf litter, mammals stored food to survive seasonal dryness and mild frosts. Oceanic apex, mosasaur dominance. In the inland seas, mosasaurs attained colossal sizes. Mosasaurus hoffmanii exceeded 15 meters, its massive jaws powered by strong facial musculature. They hunted in deep waters, ambushing late ichthyosaurs, sharks like Squalicorax, and even young plesiosaurs. Late ammonites like Pachydiskos became prize prey, driving mosasaurs to evolve sharper teeth and stronger bite forces. As night fell after the long day of the late Cretaceous, the sky reddened and fine dust from the mouth of the Chicxulub crater blanketed the continents. Sunlight grew faint. Temperatures plunged rapidly, and millions of species were plunged into catastrophe. Yet, amid the fiery seas of Troodos and the seismic fury of the Deccan traps, resilient seeds of life persisted, heralding the dawn of the Cenozoic. The silent night. After the catastrophe, the moment the asteroid struck, a pillar of smoke and ash, soaring over 100 kilometers high, shrouded the sun for weeks, then circled the globe. Surface temperatures fell by 20-25 degrees Celsius, decimating angiosperm and bennettitalian forests. Lush woodlands turned to wastelands, and dinosaurs, from mighty Tyrannosaurus to graceful hadrosaurs, succumbed to hunger and cold in mass extinction. In that long, sunless night, the last dinosaur roars faded into silence. The only sounds were wind-blown ash and acid rain pelting the earth, driving fragile survivors to huddle in caves or along shorelines. The lucky survivors, yet by an evolutionary miracle, the culprit of the Cretaceous sowed seeds of hope in small survivors. Tiny mammals like Similestes sheltered in deep burrows, stockpiling food and using downy fur for warmth. Enduring the extended winter after the disaster, they burrowed in mud, estivated, and nurtured their young in pouches or nests in the humus layer. Modern birds, ornithomorpha such as Ichthyornis and Hesperornis, by virtue of moderate size and migratory habits, fled to tropical coastal refuges where sunlight persisted. Smaller enantiornithes hid beneath thick leaf litter, feeding on dried angiosperm seeds until the dawn returned. Flowering plants reach upward, low-growing angiosperms. Shrubs like Ceratophyllum and simple-leaved plants like Archaefructus quickly restored green cover. Their thick-coated seeds resisted drought, clung to the humus, and sprouted once ash settled and acid rain eased. Mycorrhizal fungi wove through roots, supplying nutrients in mineral-poor soils and helping seedlings to thrive. As sunlight gradually returned and ash cleared, vegetation spread like a fresh green carpet. Rows of new shoots broke through amidst dinosaur skeletons, reminders of both the power and fragility of life. Re-establishing the food web, with low shrubs of angiosperms and bennettitalians first to reappear, ancient grasshoppers and other insects triggered the food chain anew. Hidden mammals emerged to feed on insects. Small birds flitted back into the sky, gathering seeds and raiding nests. A new ecosystem formed in distinct tiers: low plants, insects, birds, small mammals, eventually sharks and small-toothed whales scavenging carcasses. Marine life rebounds in the oceans, mosasaurs declined in numbers, but persisted in sheltered southern shallows. Ichthyosaurs, though diminished, survived in the warm, ancient Antarctic. Pliosaurs nearly vanished, ceding marine dominance to early sharks like Cretaceous and the soon-to-emerge early whales such as Basilosaurus. Primitive coral reefs re-established on shallow seafloors under diminished light, renewed first by multicellular and microalgae, then by sponges, and finally by corals. The rise of mammals. As the world reopened, small eutherian mammals diversified rapidly. Families like Leptictidae, insectivores, and Apotemidae, fruit-eaters, spread across Laurasia, inhabiting mangrove swamps to dry grasslands. The first pantodons, tree-eating herbivores, emerged in North America, using long forelimbs to pluck angiosperm fruits and crack seeds. Perhaps the gentlest image is of a pair of prototherians such as Theropodon emerging from a riverside burrow at the first Paleocene dawn, foraging for insect fragments, fungal spores, and tender plant shoots. Modern birds rule the skies. Ornithomorpha, ancestors of today's birds, diversified into myriad lineages across the heavens. Early neonithes appeared by the late Paleocene, with better insulating plumage and powerful pectoral muscles for long-distance flight and seasonal migration. The arrival of primitive gulls and herons marked a turning point, as birds truly came to master both land and sea. Geology and climate transform. Once ash settled after several years, greenhouse warming from Deccan-trapped CO2 caused temperatures to rise rapidly. A warm, humid, tropical climate enveloped most continents. Angiosperm rainforests flourished, stabilizing water and carbon cycles, and laying the groundwork for the explosive biodiversity of the Paleogene. The triumph of life. From the Cretaceous' dusty ruin, the seeds of warm-blooded mammals and modern birds soared. Flowering plants dominated every landscape, and the oceans teemed anew with life. The world reborn was no longer an ashen wasteland, but a verdant paradise where every creature, from the tiniest to the grandest, continued the evolutionary saga. When you close your eyes, imagine the first Paleocene sunrise, golden light filtering through fresh angiosperm leaves, birdsong across a sky empty of dinosaurs, and the soft cries of newborn mammals exploring their world. The journey from single-celled beginnings to humanity still marches on, but this moment marks a shining new chapter, the glorious Cenozoic, carrying us from the Paleocene to the Holocene, when mammals reigned supreme and humans wove the fabric of civilization. When the ash clouds of the late Cretaceous finally settled and the sun shone weakly again after the mass extinction darkness, the evolutionary journey of mammals opened a brilliant new chapter, the Paleogene, also called the early Cenozoic. Earth entered a phase of relatively warm, stable climate. Angiosperms blanketed every landscape, and the empire of dinosaurs gave way to a diverse explosion of mammals. In this chapter, we will follow the first footsteps of primate ancestors, creatures carrying within them the seeds of future humans. Early Paleogene climate and terrain. About 66 to 56 million years ago, the Paleocene began with temperatures a few degrees warmer than today, and no more ash fog blocking sunlight. The land masses of Laurasia and Gondwana continued to drift slowly, forming narrow straits, islands, and peninsulas that fueled species diversification. Dense angiosperm rainforests covered the surface, interspersed with shrubs and small grasslands. Rivers, lakes, swamps, and shallow ponds became nurseries for countless life forms, from insects to fish and birds, Mammalian boom. Immediately after the dinosaurs vanished, mammals, formerly a small passive group in the Cretaceous, were given the chance to transform. Orders such as Insectivora, insect eaters, Condylarthra, early hoofed mammals, and Creodonta, ancient carnivores, all rapidly expanded. Body sizes ranged from mouse-size to early giraffe-like Phenacodus, standing up to 1 meter tall. Their differentiated molar teeth enabled them to process a rich diet of leaves, seeds, fruits, insects, and even carrion. Primitive carnivora, like the Myacidae, forebears of dogs and cats, appeared in temperate Laurasia, hunting one another and scavenging large carcasses left by the extinction. Meanwhile, hoofed Condylarthra spread across grasslands and forests, exploiting food sources from fallen fruits to young plants. Emergence of early primates, Plesiadapiformes in the wet understory. The first primate ancestors, the Plesiadapiformes, silently took root. More squirrel-like than monkey-like, they were small-bodied with sharp claws, elongated snouts, eyes on the sides of their heads, vision still underdeveloped, and highly sensitive tactile whiskers on their snouts. However, their teeth were beginning to show adaptations for crushing seeds and primitive fruits. Purgatorius, appearing immediately after the Paleocene, was mouse-sized and scurried along low branches in search of fruits, seeds, and insects. Its flexible shoulder joints allowed it to lift its body and swing from branches, foreshadowing later grasping abilities. From these squirrel primates, over tens of millions of years would evolve creatures with forward-facing eyes, opposable thumbs, and ever larger brains. Eocene world. Green forests and primate diversity. By the Eocene, 56 to 34 million years ago, Earth's temperatures reached their peak, and tropical rainforests spread into high latitudes. In North America, Europe, and Asia, true primates such as Taillardina, Adapis, and Notarctus appeared. Their eyes gradually shifted forward, granting stereoscopic vision, mobile ears, and slender, flat-nailed fingers perfect for fruit picking and climbing. Taillardina, only about 10 centimeters long, raced along twigs to pluck tiny fruits and seize insects. Adapis, larger, about the size of a small cat, had well-developed molars for eating leaves and soft fruits. They lived in small groups, communicated with soft calls and scent marks, laying the foundation for the complex social behaviors of later primates. Primate diversification. Eocene forests saw a clear split between two main primate groups: Strepsirrhini, lemur-like ancestors, and Haplorhini, monkey and ape ancestors. Strepsirrhines like Notarctus retained ancestral traits: moist noses, keen olfaction, and nocturnal habits. Haplorhines, such as tiny Archicebus, evolved larger nocturnal eyes and eventually diurnal vision, along with an expanding brain. Genera such as Darwinius, Ida, possessed incisors for biting insects and molars for crushing leaves, indicating a varied diet. Their hands and feet, with opposable thumbs, further developed the grasping ability that would underpin later tool use. Late Eocene. Climate change. At the end of the Eocene, temperatures began to fall, ushering in the drier Oligocene. A small glaciation at the poles contracted tropical rainforests toward the equator, replaced by open woodlands and grasslands. Many Strepsirrhines adapted to the drier conditions by shrinking in size, like the Malagasy lemurs, while Haplorhines, such as Tarsier ancestors, migrated to Southeast Asia, giving rise to tarsiers and squirrel monkeys. Foundations of the higher primates, early Oligocene, 34 to 23 million years ago. Diversification of haplorhines marked the dawn of the higher primates. Old World monkeys, Cercopithecodea, and apes, Hominoidea. Growing brain size, expanded eye sockets, and more flexible skeletons provided the anatomical basis for life in the trees, and eventually on the ground. These adaptations, coupled with precise hand control and social communication, set the stage for the final conquest of the treetops, and ultimately the world, by human ancestors. When the Oligocene, 34 to 23 million years ago, began, Earth cooled markedly. Ice sheets expanded at both poles. Tropical rainforests receded, giving way to grasslands, semi-arid regions, and open woodlands. It was also the time when the primate branch Haploini, the ancestors of tarsiers and higher primates, made significant new strides in their evolutionary journey. Sparse woodlands and Oligocene grasslands. Along the subtropical belt, tall forest cover thinned out, replaced by drought-tolerant shrubs and open grasslands. Sunlight streamed through the sparse canopy, warming the ground by day and allowing it to cool suddenly at night. Moisture-retaining ponds became ecological hotspots, where primates gathered to forage for dry fruits, hard seeds, and insects hiding beneath leaf litter. First Old World monkeys during the Oligocene. The earliest higher primate families split distinctly into Old World monkeys, Cercopithecodea, and the ape lineage, Hominoidea. Old World monkeys such as Egyptopithecus appeared in North Africa, small-bodied, about the size of a fox, with slender limbs and flat nails. They lived in small troops in open forests, feeding on a mix of young leaves, fruits, and insects. Their skulls remained small, but their brain cases gradually expanded, especially in regions processing vision and hand coordination. Miocene ape radiation. Entering the Miocene, 23 to 5.3 million years ago, the climate warmed again, and tropical rainforests spread across southern Europe, North Africa, and Southeast Asia. This was the golden age of early apes, Hominoidea, with dozens of diverse genera and species. Proconsul, Kenya, Uganda, 18 to 15 mr. Did not brachiate like gibbons, but had long arms and agile fingers. With robust shoulder muscles and a larger brain than Old World monkeys, Proconsul fed on soft fruits and young leaves in vast rainforests. Dryopithecus, Western Europe, 12 to 9 mr. More chimpanzee-like, with a delicate skull, but broad molars for eating nuts and hard fruits. Its flexible frame could hang inverted from branches, reminiscent of modern gibbons. Civipithecus, South Asia, 12 to 8 mr. Flat-faced with wide cheekbones, the precursor to orangutans. It moved slowly, using long nails to climb tall trees, harvesting ancient forest nuts. Oreopithecus, Italy, 9 to 7 mr. Adapted to swamp forests, with slightly curved legs that enabled brief bipedal stances when gathering reeds and tubers in marshes. This profusion shows that Miocene apes exploited every forest layer, from high canopy to mid-level and forest floor. Their brains expanded further, particularly in sensory integration regions, setting the stage for later leaps in social complexity and tool use. Forest contraction. Onset of the Pliocene. In the late Miocene and early Pliocene, 5.3 to 2.6 mr, the climate cooled slightly again, condensing dense forests around the equator, while grasslands and open woodlands expanded across East and Southeast Africa. This shift imposed new selective pressures on primates. Fruit became scarcer, hard seeds and leaves became staple foods. They spent more time walking on hard ground, and they sought lower, more sheltered refuges rather than high canopies. First hominins, against the backdrop of rolling savannas and shrinking rainforests, the Australopithecine emerged in East Africa, Sahelanthropus chadensis and Sevenpen mr, small skull with large molars, lived near riverbanks, capable of upright posture on its hind legs despite incomplete adaptations. Orrorin tugenensis, a 6 pounds ma, small body with hip joints indicating both upright walking and arboreal clinging, feeding on forest fruits and hard seeds. Ardipithecus ramidus, 4.4 mr, both arboreal and terrestrial, with feet that distributed weight for walking, long flexible fingers, feeding on forest shoots and ripe fruits. These species are the sources of the genus Australopithecus, forerunners of Lucy, A. afarensis, and many other key fossils. Walking on 2 legs not only enhanced their field of view, but also freed their hands to pick fruit and later wield primitive tools. Environmental and social influences. With brains twice the size of those in Plesiadapiformes, the first hominins began to form complex social structures, sharing food, warning one another with calls, and keeping small groups safe from predators. Their use of cobbles to crack nuts and break bones later reached the Oldowan tool industry, the dawn of human tool-based culture. As the crimson twilight stretched over the East African savanna, hominin footprints pressed into the thin layer of volcanic ash dust. The final story of Chapter 6 began to unfold. From agile Australopithecus to self-aware Homo sapiens, the journey on 2 legs would lead us to the Anthropocene, Australopithecus afarensis and Lucy. About 3.92.9 million years ago, Australopithecus afarensis, typified by the fossil Lucy at Ledi Geraru, Ethiopia, walked upright on 2 legs. Petite, about 1.22 meter tall, with a mixed dentition of sharp canines for fruits and seeds, and broad molars for crushing tubers and roots. Lucy and her troop gathered fruits from bushes, foraged for dried roots in sandy soil, and occasionally dug shallow burrows. The hip joint of A. afarensis had evolved to bear full body weight when standing, while the hands still retained a partially opposable thumb and could grasp branches. The peep-peep of Lucy's young echoed through the valley, and the crack of a twig under a mother picking snails and tubers painted the simple scene of the first hominin life. Homo habilis, pioneer of stone tools, around 1.4 million years ago, Homo habilis appeared with a brain expanded to 600 to 700 cm larger than A. afarensis. The handy man fashioned Oldowan tools, river cobbles flaked into sharp flakes used to strip bark, cut game meat, and crack hard seeds. In the flickering glow of early hearths, H. habilis collected stones and animal bones, using tools to extract marrow and fat, sharing meals with kin. The foreign clack of stone on stone echoed across misty plains, marking the dawn of tool-based culture, where hominins not only adapted to their environment, but began to shape it. Homo erectus, venturing beyond Africa. A leap forward occurred about 1.9 million years ago. Homo erectus with a 900 cm brain. Average height 1.6 cm, and a balanced build like modern humans. H. erectus mastered fire and Herculean tools, symmetrical hand axes for chopping wood, butchering large game, and digging up tubers in hard ground. With improved thermoregulation and endurance walking, H. erectus migrated out of Africa into Asia and Europe. At Dmanisi, Georgia, and Sangiran, Indonesia, fossils show them clustering around hot springs, sharing rock shelters, hunting boar and large primates. The pop of firewood in the night and dancing embers on rugged faces created a grand adventure on new continents. Homo heidelbergensis and Homo neanderthalensis between 700,000 and 200,000 years ago. Homo heidelbergensis inhabited Europe and Africa with a Poisson 200,003 brain. They built shelters of branches and hides, hunted woolly mammoths with long spears, used fire to stay warm, and crafted sophisticated flake tools. From their lineage came Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, adapted to glacial climates, stocky bodies, broad noses, large eyes, and powerful jaws. Neanderthals hunted reindeer, deer, and bison on icy plains. They buried their dead with simple rites, placing flowers and bone tools, showing spiritual awareness and community ties. The tapping of bone drums in limestone caves created a sacred resonance in the cold night. Homo sapiens, the light of consciousness. About 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged in Africa with a 1,357 brain, complex language, and abstract thought. They painted in Blombos Cave, South Africa, and Chauvet Cave, France, crafted bone fishhooks and needles, and made shell bead jewelry. Around 70,000 years ago, a second great migration carried H. sapiens out of Africa to Australia, Europe, and the Americas. They cooperatively hunted mammoths, cultivated wheat and legumes, and built clay-walled villages, beginning agriculture. Drums and songs echoed around fires, weaving myths of origin and destiny. From Stone Age to Metal Ages, over millennia, H. sapiens advanced through the Neolithic, polishing axes and spears, making pottery and textiles. In the Chalcolithic and Bronze Age, they mined copper, alloyed bronze, and built the first cities in Mesopotamia and Egypt. The clang of metal casting rang out as monuments and pyramids rose, and writing transmitted knowledge. From single-celled oceanic beginnings through the dinosaur reign, to the first and final hominin strides, and ultimately Homo sapiens with skillful hands and creative minds, life's epic continues when the first light of the Neolithic dawn, circa 12,000, 6,000 BCE, spread across the vast fields. Humanity began a new chapter, the agricultural revolution. After countless centuries of wandering, hunting, and gathering, people finally settled by fertile rivers and on well-drained highlands, building homes, sowing seed, and tending crops. From foraging to sowing, previously, early humans had followed wild herds for meat and scavenged edible leaves. But as population density rose, wild food grew scarce. They noticed grains of wheat washing down stream beds, then sprouting where they fell. The first farmers in Mesopotamia and China's Yangtze Valley carefully collected wild wheat, barley, and millet seeds to store beneath reed roofs, then sowed them in higher ground at the next rains. Their planting methods were rudimentary, scratching soil with sticks, scattering seed in rows, and gently tamping it down with their feet. When shoots appeared, they weeded out unwanted plants, channeled water from small irrigation ditches, and applied organic fertilizers, bird droppings, and animal manure to the fields. Early harvests were meager, but each year yielded enough wheat to store for lean times, creating a new sense of security and stability. Building permanent villages. With a steady food supply, people no longer roamed. They erected thatched huts with reed or wood frames. Along the Tigris-Euphrates, villages like Jarmo and Çatalhöyük sprang up. Houses packed tightly together, connected by flat roofs, used as communal space, and narrow alleys winding through lush vegetable gardens. Each home had two main rooms, one for cooking, drying grain, and shaping clay into pottery, the other for sleeping. Packed earth floors topped with straw mats. When night fell, the smoky scent of cooking grain and wood smoke drifted through the lanes. Elders sat by the hearth sharing stories, while children curled under animal hide blankets, drifting off in peace. Domesticating animals. Alongside planting, people began taming wild beasts. Wolves became loyal dogs, accompanying field sowers and guarding the village at night. Next came goats and sheep, for milk, meat, and wool, followed by pigs and draft animals like cattle and water buffalo. In wattle and daw pens, flocks of goats bleated at dawn. Sparrows stirred the maize fields awake. Drumbeats signaled harvest time across the plains. Livestock not only provided food, but also pulled ploughs, scattered seed, and spread manure, enabling farmers to expand their fields. Crafts and trade. With agricultural surpluses, not everyone needed to farm. Some specialized in weaving baskets, cords, and fishing nets. Others molded black clay pottery in wood-fired kilns for storing grain and water. Still others became the first metal workers, melting copper and tin. These craft goods became valuable trade items. Painted pottery decorated with wheat motifs, colored fiber baskets, bronze axes carved with buffalo designs, exchanged in riverside markets. Vendor calls and cicadas' buzz mingled with the smell of burning banana leaves, filling morning markets with life. Labor division and social organization. Stable harvests and crafts led to social stratification. Scribes, irrigation supervisors, and grain store accountants held important roles. Artisans worked their own plots, while laborers received food rations by season. Villages were governed by councils of elders, seasoned farmers who read the stars, forecast rains, and presided over festivals to beg sky and earth for good harvests. Youth danced in circles around the hearth, offering prayers to Mother Earth and the crop spirits. Early irrigation engineering. To extend cultivation onto drier soils, communities dug canals to divert river water into maize, rice, and legume fields. Earthen embankments regulated flow. Wooden gates opened and closed on cue, all managed by the entire village. In the dry season, the soft murmur of flowing water soothed villagers like a country lullaby, inspiring dreams of bountiful harvests. When rains returned, the canals flushed out excess, preventing floods and keeping young shoots healthy. First civilizations, writing and ritual. To record harvest yields and track seed inventories, people invented cuneiform writing on clay tablets. Scribes logged grain surpluses, offerings to the gods, and festival dates. Clay seals bearing fish, cattle, and wheat symbols became family signatures. Spring and harvest festivals, such as Ludlul, were grand affairs. Men danced in circles to bronze drum rhythms. Women presented loaves of fresh wheat bread, and children carried jasmine and incense around communal fires, praying for the next cycle of abundance and prosperity. When the simple thatched huts of the Neolithic shaped villages, the transition into city-state and kingdom eras, roughly 4,000 pound 2000 BCE, saw humanity concentrate in urban centers, establish centralized power structures, and launch the first glorious civilizations. Birth of the Sumerian city-states. On the fertile lower floodplains of the Tigris-Euphrates, agricultural tribes gradually merged into the first city-states. Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Lagash. Uruk, with a population up to 50,000, became the world's first true city. Terraced streets following the terrain, a network of irrigation canals feeding the fields, and bustling docks trading grain and animal wool. At Uruk's heart stood the elevated temple of the god-king, En, the precursor to later ziggurats. Each morning, priests led processions bearing barley beer, honey cakes, and dates up the steps to Inanna and Enki's shrine, praying for favorable rains and gentle winds. Drumbeats echoed across the plaza, ritual rhythms blending with incense smoke to create a uniquely sacred atmosphere. Cuneiform writing and clay tablets. Complex agricultural management and taxation drove the Sumerians to invent writing around 3200 BCE. Using reed styluses on damp clay tablets, they inscribed wedge-shaped signs to record grain quantities, lengths of traded textiles, and even mythic tales such as Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta. In Uruk's archives, thousands of tablets were categorized by granary, by merchant convoy, demonstrating a professional bureaucracy. These records were not merely economic receipts, but also preserved early knowledge of astronomy, calendars for sowing seasons, and medicine. Akkadian dynasty and the First Empire, around 2350 BCE, Sargon of Akkad conquered Uruk, unified Mesopotamia, and founded the Akkadian Empire, the first Middle Eastern kingdom ruled by a divine king. The capital, Akkad, possibly at Tel Brak, was laid out in a grid of straight streets, featuring a grand palace and towering ziggurat. Under Sargon and his son Naram-Sin, a system of couriers, running messengers, carried news across the empire. Akkadian legions marched swiftly using chariots drawn by horses, ensuring security and steady tax collection. Stone reliefs depict Naram-Sin wearing a horned helmet as he ascends divine steps to crush rebellious foes, a lasting symbol of monarchic power. Ancient Egypt, Upper and Lower Kingdoms contemporaneously along the Nile. Ancient Egyptian civilization rose. Pharaoh Menes Narmer united Upper Egypt, Red Crown, and Lower Egypt, White Crown, around 3100 BCE, inaugurating the first dynasty of a unified realm. Memphis became the political and economic nexus, its palace built of mud brick and its temple dedicated to Ptah. The Nile's annual flood deposited fertile silt on the fields, yielding abundant produce for the royal court and commoners. To record events, Egyptians carved hieroglyphs into limestone and pressed ink onto papyrus scrolls. Envoys bearing bread and beer offerings approached the sun god Re, praying for balanced floods and bumper harvests. Indus and Gaga Hakra valleys, Harappan civilization. In the distant east, along the Indus and Gaga rivers, another brilliant civilization flourished, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, 2600 to 1900 BCE. These cities were planned in a grid, houses built of fired brick, and they featured advanced drainage, wastewater carried away from homes into covered sewers. Mohenjo-Daro's centerpiece was the Great Bath, a vast waterproofed brick pool, indicating communal bathing rites with religious and hygienic functions. Beneath streets, water spigots and toilets connected to subterranean drains, demonstrating an advanced vision of urban infrastructure. Northern China, Yellow River Valley. In North China, around 2100 to 1600 BCE, the semi-legendary Xia dynasty gave way to the Shang dynasty, 1600 to 1046 BCE. Along the Yellow River, the Shang used tortoise shells and animal bones for divination, inscribing oracle bone script, the forerunner of Chinese characters. Anyang, the Shang capital, was ringed by high earthen walls. Palaces and ancestral temples of precious timber stood within. Thousands of oracle bones unearthed there record crop forecasts, warfare, and sacrificial rituals, revealing that the king served as both political leader and high priest. Structure of power and religion. In Sumer, Egypt, the Indus region, and China alike, early kingdoms blended secular authority with divine sanction. Rulers were regarded as sons of heaven, issuing commands in the god's name and mediating between mortals and the divine. Temples, pyramids, ziggurats, and palaces all underscored the sacred and untouchable nature of royal power. Long-distance trade and early currency. With abundant produce, these kingdoms established long-distance trade networks. Wool from Mesopotamia to Egypt, Baltic amber to India, jade from southern China to Mesopotamia. By around 2000 BCE, Mesopotamians adopted the Tem Kempe, special clay tokens, as proto-currency, marking values in grain, textiles, and metals. Caravans of traders rode camels across the Arabian Desert and Sinai Peninsula, carrying gold rings, ivory, and exotic spices. The clip-clop of hooves and the rumble of ox carts over red earth roads formed the vibrant soundtrack of ancient commerce. When the simple thatched roofs of the Neolithic-shaped villages, the Bronze Age dawned with a series of pioneering, imperial civilizations that sparked profound social and cultural revolutions. In this section, we'll tour Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia, the Indus-Gaga Basin, and the Yellow River, witnessing the formation of fully centralized states, the first codified laws, and the birth of historical and philosophical thinking. The Babylonian Kingdom and the Code of Hammurabi, circa 1792 to 1750 BC. Under King Hammurabi, Babylon rose to dominate Mesopotamia. At the foot of Babylon's Acropolis stood a grand palace and bustling bazaars, where merchants traded silver for linen and Babylonian pottery. Most remarkable was Hammurabi's code, etched on a black stone pillar over 2 meter tall, which laid out 282 laws covering taxes, land rights, and punishments of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The code protected the poor and women, while clearly stratifying penalties by social class, free persons, slaves, and foreigners, offering the earliest example of a state governed by law, albeit law issued by a divine king. The Hittite Empire and its clash with Egypt. In eastern Anatolia, modern Turkey, the Hittites ascended between 1600 to 1178 BCE. Centered at Hattusa, in a limestone valley, they excelled in bronze metallurgy, tin bronze, and fielded 2-horse chariots and bronze plate armor. Their climactic conflict came at Kadesh, 1296 BCE, where Pharaoh Ramses II and King Muwatalli II each deployed over 5,000 chariots. Although the battle ended in stalemate, Kadesh marked a military turning point, and in 1258 BCE, the two powers signed the Treaty of Kadesh, the earliest surviving multilateral peace agreement, establishing the concept of a balance of power. Egypt's Middle and New Kingdoms after the Old and Middle Kingdoms Egypt entered its new kingdom, 1550 to 1069 BCE, in splendor. Under pharaohs Hatshepsut, Amenhotep III, and Ramses II, Thebes flourished. Luxor and Karnak gleamed with gilded pylons, and processions along the Channel of Hathor carried copper and tin from foreign lands. Beyond worshipping Amun-Ra, New Kingdom Egyptians constructed a royal necropolis in the Valley of the Kings, carving hieroglyphs and colorful reliefs on limestone to guide the pharaoh's journey in the afterlife. This belief in immortality shaped funerary architecture across the Mediterranean. Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations. On Crete, the Minoans, 1450 BCE, built the four-story palace at Knossos, adorned with marine frescoes, bathtubs, and public baths. They traded olive oil and pottery with Egypt and Mesopotamia, writing in the still undeciphered Linear A. When Knossos fell to earthquakes and invaders, the Mycenaeans, 1600 to 1100 BCE, on mainland Greece rose. Their citadels at Mycenae and Tiryns glittered, and Linear B tablets recorded expenditures, taxes, and granary stocks, laying the groundwork for Homeric epic. The Indus Valley's mysterious decline between 2600 to 1900 BCE. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro shone with advanced drainage systems, public baths, and the enigmatic, pragmatic pillar of carved granite. By about 1900 BCE, the Indus civilization waned, likely due to climate change, river shifts, and Aryan migrations, leaving abandoned cities and countless enigmas. Ancient China, Zhou dynasty, and Confucius. Following the Shang, the Zhou dynasty, 1046 to 256 BCE, introduced the mandate of heaven, asserting that emperors ruled by divine right. The spring and autumn and warring states periods, 770 to 221 BCE, became an intellectual flowering. Confucius compiled the Analects and Mencius championed benevolent rule. Laozi authored the Tao Te Ching, articulating Wu Wei, non-action, and the Tao. Zhou and Confucian thought set the moral, political, and educational foundations of East Asia for millennia. Neo-Babylonian and Achaemenid Persian empires. After the Akkadians, the Neo-Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar II, 605 to 562 BCE, rebuilt Babylon's splendor, complete with the Hanging Gardens, one of the seven wonders. Next, the Achaemenid Persian Empire, 550 to 330 BCE, under Cyrus and Darius I, stretched from Anatolia to India, founding the opulent capital at Persepolis, governing diverse peoples via satraps, and linking them with the 2,700-kilometer circular royal road, standardizing Aramaic for administration. Structures of power and intellectual legacy. By the Bronze Age's end, centralized states codified laws, and early social, religious, and philosophical ideas were firmly in place. Concepts like the mandate of heaven in China, rule by law in Mesopotamia, temple hymnody, and Confucian ethics laid the groundwork for countless succeeding civilizations. Looking forward, gateway to the classical age picture, Hammurabi beneath a flickering oil lamp, or Confucius teaching under a cypress tree as you ready yourself for the classical era. Greece and Rome, India's Maurya and Gupta empires, Sassanid Persia and Byzantium, and Han China. Those civilizations would ignite science, art, law, and learning, shaping the world we know today, as the finely carved temples and grand architecture of the Bronze Age gave way to classical civilization, Europe and Asia entered an era of intellect, art, and politics, where Greek, Roman, Mauryan Indian, and Han Chinese cultures together painted humanity's most radiant portrait. In Part 1, we begin on the Mediterranean shores, explore the Greek city-states, witness the Athenian democratic breakthrough, feel the Spartan spirit, and march alongside Alexander the Great. Origins of the Greek polis. The earliest coastal settlements around the Aegean, Mycenae, Tiryns, left behind linear B scripts and art despite their Bronze Age decline. By the 8th century BCE, Ionian, Aeolian, and Achaean settlers founded independent city-states, polis. Athens in Attica, Sparta in the Peloponnese, Corinth on the Isthmus, and Miletus as an eastern trade hub. Each polis functioned as a mini-state with its own territory, citizens, and laws, set amid plains, grassy hills, and coastal strips. Athens thrived on olive groves, barley fields, and silkworm farms. Sparta on plains and pine forests that bred war horses. Corinth on maritime trade in blue and white pottery across the Mediterranean. Athens, cradle of democracy and ideas, by the mid to 6th century BCE, after land crises and debt bondage, Solon reformed Athenian law, cancelling debts and extending citizenship to landholders. By the late 5th century BCE under Pericles, the Athenians erected the Acropolis, and citizens gathered on the Pnyx to debate and vote on every measure, from military expenditures to the Dionysia festival. Athens became the literary and philosophical heart of Greece. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides staged tragedies at the Great Dionysia. Herodotus chronicled the Persian Wars. Thucydides dissected the Peloponnesian War. Socrates pioneered dialectic inquiry. Plato founded the Academy and sketched his ideal republic. Aristotle systematized logic, biology, and political theory. Sparta, an iron-willed commonwealth. In stark contrast to liberal Athens, Sparta forged a harsh warrior society. From age 7, Spartan boys entered the agoge, an austere military training program teaching endurance, self-reliance, and obedience. Clad in red cloaks and armed with spears and short swords, Spartan citizens, Spartiates, formed an impenetrable phalanx. Ruling over Laconia and Messenia, they elevated themselves as a warrior aristocracy, while helot serfs worked the land. Governed by 2 kings, the Council of Elders, Gerousia, and the Assembly, Apella, Sparta remained a perpetual military powerhouse, exemplified by King Leonidas' stand at Thermopylae, 480 BCE, with 300 elite hoplites. Peloponnesian War and the rise of Macedonia. After repelling Persia, Athens led the Delian League to build a powerful navy and levy tribute from allied cities, provoking growing tensions with Sparta and his Peloponnesian League. The brutal Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BCE, drained both states. Plague ravaged Athens, and Spartan commander Lysander destroyed its fleet, forcing its surrender. This conflict marked the beginning of the classical city-state's decline and opened the way for Macedonia's ascendancy in the north. Macedonia and Alexander the Great. In the late 4th century BCE, Philip II of Macedonia, through phalanx reforms, elite companion cavalry, and dynastic alliances, subjugated most of Greece. In 336 BCE, his son Alexander inherited the throne, and in 334 BCE, crossed the Hellespont to confront Persia. he crushed Persian forces at Issus, 333 BCE, seized Memphis, Babylon, and Persepolis, and founded Hellenic cities such as Alexandria. Pressing east to the Indus, he reached as far as the Hyphasis before dying in Babylon in 323 BCE at age 32. His empire fractured among his generals, the Diadochi, giving rise to Hellenistic realms: Ptolemaic Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in Syria, and Antigonid Macedonia. Legacy of Greek thought and art. Though politically divided, classical Greece's legacy endured. The Doric Parthenon, the sculpted Nike of Samothrace, Homeric epics, Socratic philosophy, Euclidean geometry, and Hippocratic medicine all became foundational for Roman and later Islamic civilizations. As the brilliant dawn of classical Greece faded in the eastern wind, the Roman Empire and the great dynasties of India and China rose in turn, bringing momentous changes to human history. In this section, we will examine Rome's expansion, the rise of the Maurya and Gupta empires in India, the flourishing of the Han dynasty in China, and finally, the trade routes that linked Europe and Asia. Roman Republic and Empire. From a small settlement on the Tiber, Rome evolved into a republic 509 to 27 BCE, with a system of 3 magistrates, the triumviri, and a powerful senate. Through disciplined legions, pioneering road and bridge construction, and a formidable navy, Rome first conquered the Italian peninsula, then swept across the Mediterranean, defeating Carthage in the 3 Punic Wars, 264 to 146 BCE, and extending its reach into Hispania, Gaul, North Africa, and the eastern Mediterranean. In 44 BCE, civil war between Julius Caesar and conservative senators ended with Caesar's assassination, clearing the way for Augustus to found the Roman Empire in 27 BCE. Under the Pax Romana, 27 BCE 180 CE, the vast empire ran smoothly. The network of roads, all roads lead to Rome, the cursus publicus postal service, and the stable denarius currency. Millions of Latins, Greeks, Carthaginians, and Jews lived under emperors from Augustus to Trajan and Hadrian. Rome's legacy extended beyond conquest. The Lex Romana legal code, Galenic medicine, and monumental architecture such as the Colosseum and Pantheon endured for millennia. Maurya and Gupta dynasties in India, on the Indian subcontinent, after centuries of small kingdoms. Chandragupta Maurya, 321 to 297 BCE, forged the Mauryan Empire. Guided by the scholar Chanakya, he centralized administration, expanded 2 annual harvests, and mastered iron weaponry. His son, Emperor Ashoka, 268 to 232 BCE, after the bloody Kalinga campaign, embraced Buddhism, erecting stone stupas and inscribing moral edicts on pillars throughout the realm. After Mauryan decline, the 4th century CE saw the Gupta dynasty rise, c. 320 to 550 CE, the Golden Age of India. Under Chandragupta Mummas, Samudragupta, and Chandragupta, rock-cut sculpture, classical literature, Kalidasa, mathematics, the invention of zero and the decimal system, and Ayurveda medicine flourished. The bustling capital Pataliputra traded silk and spices all the way to Rome, creating an intercontinental commerce web. Han China and the Silk Road in East Asia, following the Qin and early Han. Emperor Wu of Han, the 141 to 87 BCE, unified China and expanded its borders. he dispatched Zhang Qian on 2 missions beyond the Hexi corridor, laying the groundwork for the Silk Road. Through the Gobi Desert and Sirdarya Valley, Chinese silk, worth its weight in gold, flowed west in exchange for gold, Fergana horses, and ivory. Han culture blossomed. Confucianism became state orthodoxy. The Han calendar standardized yin-yang cycles, metallurgy, and early Zam paper were developed. The Huangdi Neijing medical canon and Sima Qian's records of the grand historian gained eternal renown. The Han Empire stretched from Korea to Central Asia, held together by the Taishu, governors, and horse-mounted Lingshe troops. Trade and cultural exchange, thanks to the Pax Romana, Maurya, Gupta prosperity, and Han consolidation. The 1st century CE became a Bronze Age of global trade. Roman ships carried glass, olive oil, and wine to Gujarat. Indian merchants shipped spices and gemstones through Oman to the Persian Gulf. Camel caravans moved wool and metals across Central Asia, and along the Silk Road, silk and paper traveled by night to the Mediterranean, inspiring scholars and artisans worldwide. Cities like Taxila, India, Palmyra, Syria, and Dunhuang, China, became hubs for monks, merchants, and imperial envoys. Sanskrit, Greek, and Chinese scripts appeared side by side on steles, proof of cultural harmony and knowledge exchange. Crisis and decline. By the late 2nd century CE, Rome collapsed into military anarchy and the Antonine Plague, splitting into Eastern and Western empires. The Gupta realm in India faltered under Hunnic invasions. Han China fractured into the 3 kingdoms. Yet the classical age's legacy, law, religion, science, and art, had laid the foundations for the Byzantine Empire, post-Gupta India, and the Sui Tang Golden Age in China. As the dawn of classical antiquity faded in the East, the world entered its medieval age, roughly 5th or 15th centuries, a time of fragmented powers and the rise of new imperial civilizations across Eurasia. In Part 3, we'll visit the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire, the Abbasid Caliphate, the Khmer Empire in Southeast Asia, Tang China's Golden Age, and the early feudal kingdoms of Europe. The Byzantine Empire, New Rome, on the Bosphorus, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, 476 CE. The East endured as the Eastern Roman Empire, later called Byzantium, centered at Constantinople, modern Istanbul. Under Emperor Justinian I, 527 to 565 CE, Byzantium briefly reconquered North Africa, Italy, and southern Spain, codified Roman law in the Corpus Juris Civilis, the foundation of later European legal systems, and built the magnificent Hagia Sophia. Thriving trade through the Bosphorus carried Anatolian wool, Chinese silk, Indian spices, and African gold, fusing Eastern Christianity with Greco-Roman heritage. Byzantine chants filled churches, and gleaming mosaics of Christ and the saints adorned sacred spaces, forging a resilient Eastern Christian civilization. Abbasid Caliphate, Islam's Golden Age. In the 750s CE, the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads and moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, city of 100 gardens. Under Caliph Harun al-Rashid, 786 to 809 CE, Baghdad became the world's intellectual heart. The House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, hosted Persian, Indian, and Greek scholars who translated Aristotle, Euclid, and Galen. Silk, paper, and gunpowder traveled east to Baghdad. Roman glass and gold headed west. This cross-pollination birthed Arabic numerals and the decimal system, Al-Khwarizmi's algebra, medical advances by Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and philosophy by Al-Farabi and Ibn Rushd, Averroes, Khmer Empire, Angkor splendor from the 9th to 13th centuries CE. The Khmer Empire on the Mekong Plain built Angkor, Angkor Wat, the Bayon stone-faced towers of bodhisattvas, and an intricate water control system. Under Jayavarman VII, the state embraced Mahayana Buddhism and expanded across modern Cambodia, northern Thailand, and southern Vietnam. Angkor Wat symbolized both Hindu cosmology, Mount Meru at its center, and Buddhist devotion, surrounded by moat and terraces. Rice cultivation, timber exports, and trade with Champa, Dai Viet, and Chinese merchants made Khmer Angkor Southeast Asia's cultural and religious hub. Tang Dynasty, China's millennium of culture. In the 7th to 10th centuries CE, the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907, marked the pinnacle of Chinese civilization. Chang'an, Xi'an, with over 1 million inhabitants, bustled with Persian, Indian, and Central Asian merchants. Silk Road routes, overland and river, linked Chang'an to Central Asia, Persia, and the Mediterranean. Tang poetry reached its zenith. Li Bai, Du Fu, and Bai Juyi captured human longing and compassion. Painting and calligraphy adorned silk and paper. Chan Buddhism and Confucianism blended into Song Neo-Confucian thought. Tang ships and caravans carried silk, tea, and porcelain to Canton, then onward to Southeast Asia and beyond. Early European feudalism. With Western Rome's collapse, Europe entered its Dark Ages and early feudal era, 5th, 10th centuries CE. Germanic tribes, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Franks, Lombards, carved out small kingdoms. By the 8th century, Charlemagne's Carolingian Empire united much of Western Europe, reviving learning through monastic schools in the Carolingian Renaissance. Feudal society took shape. Kings granted land to nobles in exchange for military service. Serfs worked the land and paid dues. And the Church, led by the Pope, became a second source of authority, forging the concept of Christian Europe. Trade and cultural exchange. Despite political fragmentation, Europe maintained trade via the Mediterranean and Black Sea, ivory and spices from Africa and the East, local livestock and grain, and Hanseatic markets and Flemish fairs thrived in the north. Romanesque architecture gave way to soaring Gothic cathedrals with dazzling stained glass. Medieval thought, East and West in the Middle Ages, the great faiths shaped thought. Western Europe saw Thomas Aquinas reconcile Greek philosophy with Christian theology. In Persia, Sunni and Shia scholars debated in madrasas. In East Asia, Neo-Confucianism flourished under Vietnam's Li Tran and China's Song Yuan dynasties. The medieval world set the stage for the Renaissance, an age of discovery, carrying forward the legacies of Byzantium, Islam's Golden Age, Angkor's monuments, Tang artistry, and Europe's nascent nation-states. When the shadows of the Middle Ages finally lifted and the triumphant light of knowledge swept across Europe in the late 15th century, humanity entered the age of the Renaissance and the Great Voyages, an era of expansion when the world map was redrawn and the wisdom of ancient Greece and Rome was reborn in science, art, and thought. Triumph of the Renaissance. In Florence in the late 14th century, the Medici patrons fostered artists such as Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Sandro Botticelli. From Botticelli's Birth of Venus to Brunelleschi's dome atop Santa Maria del Fiore, Renaissance art revived geometry, harmonious proportions, and scientific perspective. Religious subjects merged with humanism, man at the universe's center, exemplified by Pico della Mirandola's oration on the dignity of man. Meanwhile, Gutenberg's invention of the metal movable type press, c. 1450, opened the floodgates of knowledge. The Bible, works of Aristotle, Petrarch, and Erasmus spread rapidly across Western Europe, fueling popular education and critical thinking. Discovery of the New World. On 3 August 1492, the Niña, Pinta, and Santa Maria set sail from Palos de la Frontera under Christopher Columbus. After 12 weeks across the Atlantic, they landed on Guanahani, the Bahamas, on the 12th of October 1492, ushering in the Age of Discovery. In 1497, John Cabot, under the English flag, reached Newfoundland. In 1498, Vasco da Gama found a sea route to Calicut in India. And from 1519 to 1522, Ferdinand Magellan led the first circumnavigation of the globe, triumphantly proving Earth's roundness. New nautical charts, improved compasses, and refined telescopes transformed navigation into a global science. Cultural exchange and initial consequences. These sea routes carried more than goods, spices, silk, gold, ivory. They also carried disease and ideas. Europeans brought smallpox to the Americas, decimating up to 80–90% of indigenous populations within decades. Conversely, Europe received precious metals and New World crops, potatoes, maize, tomatoes, tobacco, fundamentally improving diet and fueling rapid population growth. Early modern science. From the late 16th to the 17th century, Copernicus proposed the heliocentric model, 1543. Galileo observed the moon's surface and Jupiter's moons through a telescope. Kepler formulated his 3 laws of planetary motion, and Newton, 1687, codified universal gravitation. The light of science dispelled medieval superstition and launched the scientific revolution. Beginnings of the Enlightenment. In the 18th century, Montesquieu analyzed legislative, executive, and judicial separation of powers. Voltaire championed freedom of speech. Rousseau advanced the social contract and popular sovereignty. French salons and English coffeehouses became incubators of democratic, legal, and human rights ideals, laying groundwork for the American Revolution, 1776, and the French Revolution, 1789. Thus unfolded the Renaissance, the Age of Discovery, and the Enlightenment. Florence's workshops rang with hammer and chisel. Seville's harbour teemed with Spanish galleons. Leiden's laboratories buzzed with glassware, and Parisian salons echoed with debates on human rights. When Thomas Edison's incandescent bulbs first flickered to life in smoky workshops, and steam rose from the smokestacks of Lancashire factories in England, the world entered the industrial age, late 18th to early 20th century. Steel gears, railroads, and national power grids profoundly transformed how people worked, travelled, and connected, laying the groundwork for the modern era. The steam revolution and first industrialization. In the late 18th century, James Watt's improvements to the steam engine, introducing the double-acting cylinder, allowed machinery to run continuously without cooling. Textile mills in Manchester, Bolton, and Glasgow were no longer tied to river currents and could locate near coal mines. Cotton and linen were mass-produced on power looms, displacing slow, manual hand-weaving. George Stephenson's rocket locomotive, 1829, inaugurated the railway era. Engines running at 48 km/h pulled passenger and freight trains, cutting travel between Liverpool and Manchester to a few hours. Britain's burgeoning rail network soon spread across Europe and North America, becoming the new arterial network for commerce and migration. Electric power and urban illumination. By the late 19th century, Edison and Swan competed to patent the incandescent lamp, while Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse developed long-distance alternating current. AC systems. Cities such as London, New York, and Paris were gradually lit by electricity. Boulevards no longer glowed by dim oil lamps, but by bright white light, extending shopping and leisure hours well into the evening. Electricity also revolutionized industry. Compact electric motors replaced steam-driven shafts, improving presses, drills, and welding equipment. Early power plants rose by rivers to supply electricity to neighborhoods and factories. Transport and communications revolutions. In 1886, Carl Benz drove the first internal combustion automobile. By the early 20th century, Henry Ford's assembly line for the Model T, 1908, slashed costs and put cars into millions of hands. High-speed trains, buses, diesel ships, and the Wright brothers' first powered flight, 1903, connected the globe like never before. Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, 1876, was followed by the first transatlantic call, 1915, carrying voices under the ocean. Newspapers printed millions of copies daily, and KDKA's 1920 radio broadcast brought news and music directly into living rooms. Industrial society and the labor movement industrialization drove rapid urbanization. Rural workers flocked to cities, crowded into slums, and endured dangerous polluted factory conditions. Trade unions emerged to fight for labor rights, shorter hours, higher wages, safety regulations. Strikes across Britain, France, Germany, and the US forced governments to enact child and women labor protections. Meanwhile, Marxism and Engels's Communist Manifesto, 1848, resonated with workers and shaped emerging political parties. Class conflict became a defining feature of late 19th, early 20th century European politics. Science, medicine, and universal education. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, On the Origin of Species, 1859, Gregor Mendel's genetics, and Louis Pasteur's vaccines revolutionized biology. Surgery adopted antisepsis under Joseph Lister, and Robert Koch identified tuberculosis and cholera bacteria. Primary education became compulsory in many European nations and the US. Literacy soared, and universities expanded science and engineering faculties, producing generations of engineers, physicians, and scientists to serve industry and modern states. World wars and a new world order. Tensions among empires and rising nationalism ignited World War I, 1914 to 1918. Industrialized warfare, machine guns, tanks, bombers, claimed tens of millions of lives and devastated Europe's infrastructure. The Treaty of Versailles, 1999, redrew borders but sowed seeds of instability. Between the wars, the Soviet Union emerged from the 1917 Russian Revolution, spreading Marxism-Leninism globally. Fascism took hold in Italy and Germany, fueling aggressive expansion and leading to World War II, 1939 to 1945. The US atomic bombings of Hiroshima, Hiroshima and Nagasaki ushered in the nuclear age. The high-tech and globalization era, after 1945, the world split into US-led West and Soviet East, entering the Cold War. The space race, Sputnik, 1957, Apollo 11, 1969, and the birth of packet switch networks, ARPANET, 1969, paved the way for the information age. Personal computers, IBM PC, 1981, the World Wide Web, 1990, mobile phones, and social media transformed communication and commerce. Economic globalization, WTO founding, 1995, transnational supply chains, automation, and artificial intelligence now dominate production and labor. Yet climate change and environmental crises, triggered by industrialization, pose immense challenges. Pollution, water scarcity, and the urgent transition to renewable energy. From the steaming looms of Manchester to Edison's electric nights, from atomic devastation to the interconnected internet, humanity has passed through agricultural, industrial, and information revolutions, creating an ever more complex, connected, and potential-filled world. When the first rays of the 21st century pierced the glass and steel skyscrapers, humanity stood at a crossroads in history: continue conquering space, explore the depths of the oceans, or pause to nurture our blue planet. The final chapter of our journey, an anthem of triumph, is not just a destination, but the starting point for new dreams. The digital age and global connectivity along LED-lit boulevards from New York to Tokyo, Nairobi to Sao Paulo. We now live amid an internet of everything. Mobile screens deliver news and knowledge from every corner in an instant. Doctors diagnose via video. Students attend virtual lectures. Engineers operate robots hundreds of kilometers away. Artificial intelligence and cloud computing are driving breakthroughs in biomedicine, renewable energy, and space exploration. Data scientists have become the archaeologists of our age, excavating insights from massive datasets to forecast disasters, optimize traffic flows, and promote sustainable development. Space exploration, footprints among the stars, exactly 52 years after Apollo 11 first set foot on the moon. We return under NASA's Artemis program, preparing to build a permanent lunar base at the moon's North Pole as a springboard for Mars missions. Uncrewed probes like Perseverance scout the red planet's terrain, searching for ancient signs of life. From orbital stations to commercial space tourism projects, the dream of a multi-planetary human species is closer than ever. Look up at the night sky and imagine astronauts waving behind spacecraft viewports, and countless young minds naming yet-to-be-discovered asteroids. Climate challenge and shared responsibility. As we reach for new frontiers, our home planet still needs our care. Earth's temperatures are rising, polar ice is melting, sea levels are flooding coastlines, and extreme weather is causing droughts and deluges. We have awakened. The Paris Agreement, carbon neutrality pledges, green cities, and circular economies are all part of the response. The Amazon rainforest and Siberian steppes stand as vital signs of Earth's health. Indigenous communities, guardians of forests, rivers, and lands for millennia, are honored as stewards of our ecological heritage. Their example reminds us that technological progress must go hand in hand with sustainable stewardship. Global culture and local identities. Globalization has brought us ever closer. East-West culinary fusions, K-pop resonating around the globe, Nollywood's vibrant film industry. Yet every nation preserves its distinct identity through language, festivals, and folk art. From the buffalo sacrifice rites of Vietnam's Central Highlands to Rio's Carnival, from India's Diwali to Vietnam's Ghost Festival, humanity recognizes cultural diversity as an invaluable treasure. Whether at a Vietnamese water puppet show or Nordic winter sports festival, remember the common thread that binds us all: love of our shared human heritage, humans and machines, a future partnership. The rise of automation, collaborative robots, and embedded AI heralds an era of living alongside machines. In hospitals, surgical robots perform procedures with unparalleled precision. On farms, drones spray fertilizer and monitor pests. In classrooms, virtual tutors adapt to each student's needs. Today's children will grow up with machines not merely as tools, but as creative partners. Yet, if we fail to address ethical AI, privacy, and cybersecurity, we risk descending into technology's dark alleys. A broad humanity, from single-celled life to complex multicellular organisms, from carboniferous coal forests to LED-lit megacities, we stand on a foundation of accumulated knowledge and experience. Homo sapiens has never stopped exploring, creating, and connecting. The 21st century introduces the concept of a multiverse, not only in physics but in spirit, honoring all living beings, embracing diverse ways of life, and co-building a harmonious, multifaceted future. This triumphant final chapter closes the grand narrative, from the first droplet of single-celled life, through Cambrian explosions, Jurassic grandeur, Cenozoic rebirth, Neolithic domestication, classical zenith, to the modern technological surge. As you close your eyes, let your mind dance to the crash of lunar waves, the slow turn of steam engine wheels, the ebb and flow of digital data, and the Earth's own breath. And remember, the evolutionary journey still lies before us. Curious hearts and creative minds will continue writing fresh chapters, unveiling glorious horizons for ourselves and all life.